All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm experiencing some IT challenges here. It's decided to do an update just before we get started for our council meeting. Poorly timed. I'm going to call to order the special meeting of council for September 23rd, 2024 at 7 o'clock. This is our community's house. We're all guests in it here to serve our community. My name is Mike Little, Mayor of the District of North Vancouver, and so the pleasure falls to me to welcome you all here to our special meeting. What makes this a special meeting is just simply that it wasn't on the calendar at the beginning of the year. So we pass a schedule of meetings back at the tail end of 2023 for what we project for the year. This one wasn't on the agenda, and the reason for that is that on the September 9th meeting, we experienced an IT technical issue with the entire Upper Lonsdale corridor being out of internet. And because we've moved our services onto hybrid systems, it meant that we weren't able to record and publish and share our meeting that night. And so we had to reschedule it to this evening's meeting. I'd like to start off our meeting in a good way. We respectfully acknowledge the original peoples of these lands and waters, specifically the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam peoples, on whose unceded ancestral lands the District of North Vancouver is located. We value the opportunity to learn, share, and serve our community on these unceded lands. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will someone please move its adoption? Moved by Councillor Murray, second by Councillor Ma. I'll call a question on the matter. All in favor? Contrary minded, and motion is carried. Council, in that package, there are 3 sets of minutes that have been circulated, and they represent the meetings of June 17th, July 8th, and July 22nd. Are there any errors or omissions from those meeting minutes as presented? Hearing none, they've been moved by Councillor Murray. Is there a seconder on the matter? Councillor Back. Call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded, motion is carried. Okay. Moving right along. At the beginning of every regular meeting of council, and this special meeting is intended to mimic our normal regular meeting of council, we have a period of up to 30 minutes for members of the public to share concerns that they may have. We start with a speakers list, which is set up by the clerk's department. And then from there, if we have additional time, we'll add additional speakers. To start us off this evening, the first speaker that is signed up on an agenda item is Mark Friesen. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 3 minutes to address the council.
Great, thank you. And I thought I was 6, so I'm jumping right in. So this is exciting. So good evening, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here. As mentioned, my name is Mark Friesen. I'm the Executive Director at Hollyburn Community Services Society. I've stepped in for Nanette Taylor, who many of you know well. She's retired, and so I've had the privilege of stepping into that role. And I'm here to speak tonight about the report on the agenda, Transitional Housing. So, and just to speak in support of what's the findings in that report, but also just to highlight a couple of items that are in that report that I wanted to pinpoint on. So as we all know, affordable housing is a challenge throughout the region and here. And even though I'm new to the role, I'm very aware of the support this council has demonstrated to affordable housing in the area, and also partnering with nonprofits and charities such as Hollyburn Community Services. So just up the street here, as highlighted in the report, there's 86 units of housing going up at Delbrook. Happy to report that cabinetry has been going in the last couple of weeks. Last week, I had the privilege of meeting with the executive director at Sanford Housing. We're collaborating with them to provide affordable housing at Salal House, another development made possible through the vision on this council and the district. So our appreciation, gratitude, and thanks for the vision you've demonstrated in making those projects possible and collaborating with nonprofits and charities such as Hollyburn. Unfortunately, I'm also aware of the challenges that are highlighted in the report, as outlined the homeless count figures, demonstrating that despite the efforts that I just mentioned, homelessness is going in the wrong direction. So we've made progress by collaborating together, but the trends are going in the wrong direction. So a 40% increase in homelessness. Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives confirming, it's an older report, but that the number of working poor households is 5th worst on the North Shore compared to other municipalities in the region. And then the incidences of poverty among children are proportionally higher here than throughout the province. So despite the challenges, my message is simple. There's some great solutions alluded to in the report, but the report does paint a pretty dire picture in terms of government funding that's available to support housing. And I'm simply here to say that you don't have to do it alone, and government providers don't have to do it alone. By leveraging and partnering with nonprofits and charities such as Hollyburn and other nonprofits, you can leverage community assets to tackle this challenge together. And just a reminder, nonprofits and charities have a business model with infinite potential. You won't often hear nonprofit leaders say this, but charities have infinite potential for diverse revenue sources through earned income, donations, gifts in kind, real estate assets. We can leverage those items together with government funding. So by partnering together and collaborating, you can turn $1 of taxpayer dollars into $5 of programming impact. So I look forward to continuing to work together. Don't do this alone. We can do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mark Friesen. The next speaker I have is Jason Wexler, followed by Jacob Isaac. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 3 minutes to address the council.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jason Wexler. I'm a director with Hollyburn Community Services Society. I also serve as the chair of our housing committee. I'd like to speak in support of the report on item 8.6 of the agenda, the Transitional Housing Solutions Report. However, I had two other goals. One was to introduce Mark Friesen, who you've just heard from. He's our new ED, continuing on and following in the footsteps of Nanette Taylor's impressive legacy. And then the second thing I wanted to do is offer heartfelt thanks from our board and our staff and clients. Your district has done an incredible job working with the community groups to deliver social, affordable, and safe housing across this municipality. I offer my profound gratitude and that of our board, our staff, and the 900 vulnerable North Shore residents we served this year. To the mayor and councilors, district staff who've dedicated precious time on the housing crisis issues we now face. Everything we've accomplished has been heavily impacted by your unwavering support. As a developer by professions, I don't see the cost of providing traditional housing getting any cheaper or easier. So programs that facilitate faster, non-traditional means of housing, such as pre-manufactured options on flexibly zoned land assets, are a key ingredient in housing those who need it most. There's a new tide of senior government buy-in for social housing, and it's my humble opinion the district should leverage the new programs while these opportunities still exist. Provision of district and senior government land assets combined with expedited district permitting processes are the only way we can get these rapid housing initiatives to work economically. At Hollyburn, our mission is to serve the North Shore's most vulnerable youth, seniors, and families. There are some truly remarkable stories of success that have come out of the district's youth safe house and senior safe houses operated by our committed team. These investments in our community, by our community, have brought hope and life-changing support for youth and seniors without shelter and to families torn apart by domestic violence. These successes don't come without extensive planning, community support, and the vision of the community leaders. As councillors, your compassion and desire to build a strong, resilient community is the first step in realization of your vision for the District of North Vancouver. I've had the pleasure to meet many of you at our various Hollyburn events this year, celebrating our 20th anniversary and the groundbreaking of our Delbrook project. Mark and I will be inviting you all to a ribbon cutting in the spring of 2025 when Delbrook opens. In closing, I support this extensive report by staff and offer our team's help in any way that we can in the future to realize transitional housing units here on the North Shore. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Jason Wexler. Next, I have Jacob Isaac, followed by Eric Jensen. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 3 minutes to address the council.
Thank you, Council and Mayor Little, for letting me speak tonight. I want to begin by commending each and every one of you for your unanimous support to create this report on transitional housing. It was a great effort by city staff, and we greatly appreciate it. My name is Jacob Isaac, and I am here on behalf of the North Shore Community Housing Action Committee, of which I am the chair. The committee wholeheartedly supports further action on creating transitional housing in the district for two key reasons. First, we need to alleviate pressure on the overcrowded shelters across the North Shore. There are very limited adult shelters on the North Shore, and the district currently operates all of the youth shelters and beds. This is concerning for a number of reasons, as housing vulnerable individuals may need to travel long distances during emergencies or may find themselves turned away at the door. This is obviously a very concerning issue. By creating transitional housing on district lands, we're able to reduce overcrowding in shelters by offering temporary but stable local housing. Additionally, transitional housing for district residents keeps housing vulnerable populations within their communities, maintaining access to necessary support systems. Secondly, we are highly encouraged by the economic efficiency and scalability offered by modular transitional housing explored in the report. I'm very aware that you are all in a very challenging position. There's an immediate need for rapid development of housing while also working with very limited funds. Modular prefabricated housing is shown to be significantly cheaper than traditional construction due to streamlined controlled production environments, and in some cases reduce hard cost by up to 30%. And beyond this, I know that immediate funds are a challenge, but in the long term, this is a financial support for your efforts, as transitional housing centralizes public services, reducing fragmentation and service inefficiencies. Without transitional housing, district shelters often see the same individuals returning repeatedly, unable to transition to permanent housing. This is obviously a strain on municipal funds, and transitional housing will provide stability, reducing the cyclical dependence on shelters, ensuring that your funds go further. And while this obviously still requires immediate municipal investment, we encourage you to take seriously the recent funding opportunities that have emerged, as well as longer standing funds as well, including the Rapid Housing Initiative, the CMHC seed funding and Affordable Housing Fund, and programs through Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada. I'd like to conclude by saying that this is not a question. This is needed in the district, and it will ensure that your efforts towards ending homelessness are realized. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comments, Jacob Isaac. The next speaker I have joining us is Eric Jensen. And don't see Eric in person, and we're not seeing a name that reflects Eric's in the online group. Just do a double check. Okay, we'll circle back to Eric a little later in the meeting and see if he's available. The next speaker I have is Peter Teven, joining us here in person. Mr. Teven, when you're comfortable, you have 3 minutes to address the council.
Sure, just not part of my presentation. I don't know if the online Zoom session is running. I've been texting with somebody waiting, and they said they haven't seen any speakers yet.
We believe it is. We can see it. So yeah, it's running.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Colbert's online and says he hasn't seen any of the speakers. And he thought he was supposed to be speaker number 2.
We can see his name. He's online on the online list.
Okay, well.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I've got a presentation here. It's difficult to see with the screen laid up so back, and it says don't adjust. I'm not sure why. Okay, thank you. Peter Teven. I'm a resident at 1900 Block Indian River Crescent. Here tonight speaking on my own behalf, not on behalf of any organization that I volunteer for. And I'm speaking to the agenda item 8.2 to do with development cost charges. You'll recall, I'm sure all of you, a principle of one, some would say a bedrock principle of our district's management and finances, that development pays for development. So what does that mean? Well, I think most people take it to mean that new infrastructure that is necessary to accommodate growth is paid for by development cost charges, not on the backs of existing residences. And I think most people would consider it unconscionable not only to get existing residents to pay for development, but worse still, to get them to pay for development on a scale that actually makes their lives more difficult. I'm going to show you some budget figures, and all I can say is that I hope in the future you rely on experts like Mr. Daniluk to get the actual figures, because I only have limited access to what information is public. And of course, I'm talking about the North Shore wastewater treatment plant. Through various channels, we tried to get detailed information, and I think pretty much Metro Vancouver has been the opposite of open and transparent. But I'm fairly adept with math, so I put some in a letter to you. I'm going to try to capsulize it here and explain the math. So what you see here is the 2021 population of the entire North Shore at just over 196,000 people. And the new North Shore wastewater treatment plant is being built to a capacity of 300,000. That is over 53% growth. I'm not sure anybody is prepared for that or wants that. But if you take the same number of average people per house, that means that eventually it will accommodate households of 129,870, up from 84,863. And that's 45,000 new dwellings. And that means that 34.55% of this project is entirely to accommodate growth. When you look at the figures, $3.86 billion, what the North Shore's share is of that, these are pre-federal government subsidy figures. In my letter, I used post figures, so it's a little, doesn't quite match up. What this would point to is a development cost charge in the district of 13,334 on top of the figures that are in the proposal tonight for 8.2. And you'll see there a charge. I am not expert enough to tell you what the commercial rates ought to be. But the other thing is that this development is driven by senior government. And if you look at this chart, you'll see that they are falling woefully short of paying their fair share. They make the decisions to drive growth. They should pay for growth. Either that or you're going to drive up housing costs into the stratosphere.
Okay.
I think you all got my recommendations, which I emailed you. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Teeman. Next speaker I have is Corey Cost, followed by Dan Mahon. Probably got that. Dr. Cost, welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 3 minutes to address the council.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Corey Cost, and I live at 2851 Colwood Drive here at Edgemont Village.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm here to discuss the development cost charges for parkland acquisition, a component of your DCCs. Metro Vancouver land prices that I attached to the report I already sent you indicates land prices are about $3 to $5 million per acre. And beginning in January 2025, Metro Vancouver will collect DCCs itself on every home that's being built in Metro Vancouver. To the tune where it rise and have only an assist factor of 1%, which is the lowest you can go, of $1,943 per unit. So you will be charged that. The district will be charging almost the same amount, just a little over $3,000, for example, for a town. That's sort of out of line with my perspective that I think there's not that much land, parkland that's used here, and the cost of that, and they charge $2,000, we charge $3,000 for all of the parks in our area. So in the report that was tabled, a tiny amount is proposed for DCCs for parks. This means we will have further cannibalization of our existing parkland In other words, development is not paying its own way. The details are described in what I sent to you. We should be charging $64,000 typically for the DCCs for a unit. And so you're so far from the mark that this means the DCCs and the ACCs collected should be significantly increased if you really stick to the idea that development should pay its own way. I've given you the numbers. I think you just have to follow through with that and see why it is we charge such a small fraction of what we should be charging. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Corey Cost. Next is Dan Mahan. I don't know. Machen. There you go. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 3 minutes to address the council.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and just for listening to a few of my concerns about the increased DCCs and the proposed ACC charges. As I mentioned, my name is Dan Machen, and I am representing the Groundwater family on a 3-lot subdivision at 1488 Berkeley Road in the Blue Ridge area of North Vancouver, Mount Seymour. I'm the son-in-law of the original owners. They've owned the property for 60 years. So we've been involved in the subdivision process with the district for about 18 months, and we're at the detailed application process today. So obviously we're concerned as an applicant with the goalpost moving. And basically our costs go from about 83 grand to about $170,000 with the proposal. So my question to council or to staff is, can you provide us or any other applicants some feedback of, what would these mean to us? Are we exempt? Being so far along the stream, it wouldn't make sense to change the goalposts. So I don't know if this is the forum to ask that question, but I would love to hear it from staff. Where do we stand, and other applicants in the process? Where are we on the financial terms? So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Machen, for your comments. Just want to clarify, staff have the address in hand and can communicate directly with the property owner. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship. We'll follow up and clarify. There are certain statutory and stream protections afforded in the Local Government Act, and it depends on timing. So we'll follow up with the applicant.
Typically, the new policy comes in for new applications, or does it typically come in when a building permit is issued? What is typically the point in time where the new rules apply?
Yeah, so the Local Government Act was amended such that if there's a precursor application in place for typical applications, so rezonings, development permits, and permits, then the new fees wouldn't apply provided the building permit is received within 12 months of the adoption of the bylaw. There is a different set of rules for subdivision, and I'd be happy to convey those in writing.
Mr. Daniluk might have comments. I have spoken about this issue today with him.
Well, I think we're going to have to look at the specific property and tell you based on where you are in the process, what's going to happen. So I'm going to have staff follow up with you if that's all right.
So you couldn't give us a more public comment?
About your specific application? No. About generally speaking about the policy in general and how we deal with provincial changes in regulations or our own changes in regulations. I think Mr. Middleburn has just addressed that. But to give you your specifics on your specific property, we'll do that directly with you.
Okay. Great.
Thank you very much. Next speaker I have is Glenn Lewis, joining us here in person. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 3 minutes to address the council.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Thank you to the council for having me. My name is Glenn Lewis. I'm the owner of a company called Renewal Development. Renewal's mission is to rescue good homes slated for demolition by physically picking them up, relocating, and repurposing them in partnership with communities that need good, sustainable housing. I'm here to speak in favor or in support of the motion in terms of the home waste prevention motion. We recently moved a home from the Colwood in Edgemont in partnership with the Squamish Nation. We hosted an event. I thank Councillor Murray and Councillor Mall for attending and joining us in that celebration of that event. Every year, 2,700 single-family homes are torn down across the region to make space for higher density. Of those 2,700 homes, we estimate about 700 are actually perfectly good homes. I see a home every single day that should not be demolished. And it's being demolished to make space for the higher density, which is quite understandable in the housing crisis that we're in. The process to achieve that density, however, is unbelievably wasteful. 40% of Metro Vancouver's landfill is full of construction and demolition waste. On a per capita basis, we are one of the demolition capitals of the world right now. This is both materially wasteful, it's wasteful from an embodied carbon perspective, and it's wasteful from an economic perspective that these homes could be relocated and repurposed in partnership with communities that need good, affordable housing. We're currently doing 27 units of housing right now in partnership with 3 different nations, the Shishal Nation on the Sunshine Coast, the Stahelis Nation in Agassiz, and the Squamish Nation here on the North Shore. This is a model that should be replicated and scaled. This is a model that we shouldn't be fighting on our own to make happen. I believe demolition should be the last option, not the first. And there are tools available to municipalities to create the right incentives. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Glenn Lewis. I'm going to circle back and just check and see if Eric Jensen has joined our meeting. Okay. All right, so we're going to move along then. So then the next speaker I have is Lyle Craver, followed by Hazen Colbert. Lyle Craver joining us on the North Shore Wastewater Treatment Plant. Welcome. When you're ready, you have 3 minutes to address the council.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've spoken here many times on behalf of myself. However, tonight I'm speaking on behalf of Lynn Valley Community Association. The Lynn Valley Community Association is specifically asking council to immediately request a public inquiry into the North Shore wastewater treatment plants. We'd originally intended to speak on behalf of the withdrawn motion, requesting a public inquiry, and we're frustrated to find out that it's been deferred until November 4th, which is after the provincial election. Meanwhile, seven local councils representing 5 different municipalities have penned an open letter calling on BC's Auditor General to conduct an independent review of the facility's finances. These councillors are actively working to request transparency and accountability from Metro Vancouver, specifically regarding the North Shore wastewater treatment plant. So why is district not part of this? Metro Vancouver has appointed a former judge who will perform an independent audit. Now, the problem with an independent audit is that these audits are typically not on a public document, and Metro Vancouver is by no means required to make it public. Every North Shore taxpayer is facing an unprecedented $21,000 tax bill, $21,000 tax bill to pay for this, and Metro Vancouver is the cause. North Shore taxpayers didn't vote for this project. The entire Metro Vancouver board did. So why then are North Shore taxpayers alone responsible for the cost overrun? Why are all Metro Vancouver members not sharing the cost of the project? This project was supposed to have been completed in 2020 at a cost of $500 million. It's now 6 times over that budget. Still, we have no idea when the project will be completed, and therefore no idea what the final cost will be. So why did Metro Vancouver award a full design and build contract to Acciona instead of doing a design ahead of time before issuing a complete separate contract to build the facility? Why was Metro Vancouver not aware of the site issues before the design build contract was awarded? Why wasn't Metro Vancouver monitoring Acciona and their progress before things got so far out of control? Is the current estimate of $3.8 billion really the final cost, including other court settlements? And is that number accurate? Or will we reveal even more cost overruns going forward? This isn't acceptable, and only a full public inquiry can determine how and why this project was so badly mismanaged and to ensure it isn't going to be repeated anywhere else. That's all the time I've got, but we request council petition for public inquiry of Metro Vancouver immediately. I note that tonight I speak on behalf of the Lynn Valley Community Association. I have two of our board members, Tim Green and Marilyn Harkness over there. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments, Loud Craver. Next speaker I have joining us virtually is Hazen Colbert. Hazen, can you hear me?
All rise. Please be
You
seated.
can hear me?
At ease. Can you hear me, Mayor Little?
Yes, I can. It's a little bit soft. If you could just speak directly into the microphone, it might be a little clearer.
Yeah, the
But,
microphone's a bit up away from me right now. Can you now hear
That's
me?
better. Yes,
Yeah.
I can. Much better. Thank you.
Right.
They just need to confirm, he confirmed.
Somebody's talking. I'll let them finish. Are they done?
Go
speaking?
ahead.
Thank you. I regret to advise that I have been much too stern, to borrow a word that you and I have used, Mayor Little, with Councillor James Hansen over the past 10 years. I offer my regrets in the context of the history of BC politics, when a certain conservative, W.A.C. Bennett, ran for office in the 1960s under the banner of social credit, a banner that has no precedent and has never been cited subsequently. In the 1970s, when I first got involved in politics in Ontario, we called him Wacky Bill Bennett. Some 64 years later, a new wacky conservatives, whose fascist right-wing policies and language make Councillor Hansen appear as a centrist, has arrived, and his name is John Busted. Busted said yesterday that there is no housing crisis and no reason for the government to involve itself with housing. Busted stated that Adam Smith's invisible hand of the marketplace will create equilibrium in the housing market. I advise that Adam Smith's classical economic theories, including the invisible hand, were based on trade among England, Jamaica, and the American colonies in oranges, cotton, and slaves. In any event, the invisible hand cannot be seen, not because it's invisible, but because it does not exist. Today, Bumstead alleged COVID was a hoax and the vaccines were designed to create government control over the proletariat. As a result of Bumstead's rambling, for the first time in my life, I will be voting NDP, and I will actually be joining James Hansen in that vote, and I commend him for many of the policies he's put forward. Thank you, and you're dismissed.
Thank you for your comments. Hazen Colbert. I see no further speakers at this time, and our time has elapsed, so I'm going to move along with the agenda this evening. The first item up for discussion today is the Centennial Bursary Awards. And so I just wanted to note that we award the Centennial Bursary to students who have distinguished themselves both academically and in our community. This bursary is from a trust fund endowed in 1958 to commemorate the centennial of the province of BC. We give a bursary to 2 students from each of the 7 secondary schools in North Vancouver School District based on the following criteria: qualities of scholarship, leadership, character, and need. The student has resided within the District of North Vancouver for the last 2 years. The student will not be receiving any other bursary or scholarship. The money must be used to continue the student's education at a post-secondary institution. The applications and nominations are made by a selection committee at each of the high schools. And today I am honored to announce the 2024 bursary recipients. And so I'll list them now: Axel Colin, Arena Ali, Cale Watson, Dylan Kays, Elijah Jack, Ethan Ray, Katrina Shortreed, Keenan Chesko, Marcus Towns, Megan Barber, Morgan Longelou, Nikki Masabi, Nikita Yardley, and Reagan Osman. I want to wish you all a great success in your academic endeavors, and glad that the district could play a role in supporting you. So on behalf of the district, congratulations to everyone. And I will just say that those students, we didn't press them to be here in person today for this. A lot of them have already started their fall studies, and they would have received this assistance leading into their fall studies. And unfortunately, there's a bit of a strange issue. We have to wait until the very end of the school year to get the final results, and then we don't have a council meeting in the middle. And then so many of them start their school studies in the fall that it's, I wish we could have them all in person and welcome them, congratulate them. But this year it is, we have already actually told them that they've won, and already provided the assistance to start their studies right away. So again, congratulations to those students and all of the students that applied to be recognized and did extra work to be considered. So well done, and thank you to the different selection committees of the different high schools for considering their selections. We do appreciate the work they've done to identify these excellent students. The next item, I should have noted that the delegation, we had communications with the delegation this afternoon, and they indicated that they would not be able to join us this evening. And so the delegation item has been withdrawn from the agenda. I will say that the District of North Vancouver continues to work directly with the Orange Shirt Society to work together on a project. We hope that that will take place in 2025, and are working through some of the design phases with our staff and with their representatives going forward. So unfortunately, the delegation is withdrawn from this evening's meeting, so I'm going to carry on with the regular agenda. Moving on to item 8.1. This is the amendment to rezoning bylaw 8651 1900 to 1950 Sandown Place, and I'll look to staff for an opening comment on the matter.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. Before you this evening is bylaw 8651 for consideration of second reading. The bylaw is presented at first reading on June 17, 2024 requires amending to reflect a reduction in vehicle parking. The applicant has revised the residential and visitor parking supply in response to comments made by council at the first reading. The total parking provision is proposed to be reduced from 42 to 36 spaces. This change is reflected in the amended vehicle parking rate of 1.56 spaces per unit, which includes 4 visitor spaces. No changes have been made to the 4 accessible parking spaces or any other part of the proposal. Staff support the revised parking rate as the development is located within a village center within close proximity to the R2 rapid bus line, and it is consistent with the directions established in the OCP and the Lower Capilano Marine Village Implementation Plan. The proposed reduction in parking spaces will reduce vehicle trips associated with the new development, reduce the construction cost and the embodied carbon associated with a smaller underground garage, and increase the amount of site area that will remain permeable. Thank you for your consideration this evening.
Thank you very much for your comments. Council, looking for Councillor Back, you have a motion?
Sorry, I will move the staff recommendation.
Okay, is there a seconder for the staff recommendation? Seconded by Councillor Ma. Councillor Back, your comments?
Not too much to add, other than this was part of the discussion that we had in terms of the location of the development, given its proximity to the Lionsgate Town Center and to transit. So I'm supportive of the reduction in parking.
Very much. Councillor Ma, your comments?
Thank you. I wasn't that concerned about the parking when council gave first reading to this project. To me, there needs to be a balance between encouraging people to use transit and having enough on-site parking to avoid any spillover into neighboring communities. I continue to support this project and support giving this bylaw second reading. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other speakers. Councillor Muir, your comments?
Thank you, Mayor Little. I'm not going to support the reduction in parking. This is a landlocked area, and we've already seen examples of multifamily developments not parking in the developments they have because additional parking often costs money, especially in rentals, and there are rental apartments in that area. I'll harken back to a development that was done in the 80s before I was elected in Deep Cove, Mariners Cove on Banbury, that had no visitor parking installed as per the development, zero. And, 40 years later, now we're faced with implementing resident-only parking, and that has ultimately removed any opportunity for those owners to be able to park in Deep Cove because now we're restricting it. But when the developer built the development, there was tons of parking. Who knew that 40, 50 years later, a rock and a donut would attract the thousands that are coming into Deep Cove on a regular basis. So I'd also point out that right now we're facing cuts to TransLink. TransLink has no sustainable funding for their operations, and they're looking at cuts in their service levels. So I know that we're, trying to encourage people to get out of their car and onto a bus, but right now we don't have enough service to be able to accommodate those needs. And unless senior levels of government come to the table with significant dollars to prop up funding, over $600 million a year just in this region to look after the current levels, I think the jury's going to be out on how this community is going to operate. Lastly, I would say that we have not seen a reduction in cars on the North Shore. We've seen an increase in licenses on the North Shore and cars. The lineup, the cut has failed again. The Mountain Highway interchange has failed again. And now we're going to wait and see what happens with the next phase of Main Street in North Vancouver and what the ministry has up its sleeves in regards to that scenario, because it's chaos and backed up to Lonsdale every single day. So I get that we're trying to figure this out, but the premise was that, the car was a GHG emitter. So then everybody got an electric vehicle. They still take up the same amount of space. Wealth brings convenience and brings a car. And I'm sorry, but we just can't engineer ourselves out of the car unless we're going to give real solutions to transportation. And I don't see it. I don't see that happening. So I think it's losing 6 spaces seems like a small amount, but tell that to the people that live in Mariners Cove that have no parking at all for their visitors.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Next, I have Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. I certainly agree with Councillor Murray's comments about the failure of our transportation system and how much care we need to show as we continue to densify and develop. However, I will be supporting this parking reduction. From my point of view, it's a step in the right direction. This is an area well serviced by transit. As we go forward, I think we have to open our mind to development that doesn't involve adding more cars to our precious road space. And I respect the fact that in this case, we are by a small increment. It was 42 parking spaces, 6 visitor spaces. Now it's 36 parking spaces, 4 visitor spaces. From my point of view, pardon me, we have to recognize this as a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Councillor Hanson. Just my own comments on the matter. There's no question that you can't build it later, right? When you don't provide that flexible space that parking provides, you can't just add it after the fact. This has me very concerned in a lot of our neighborhoods because it becomes the flexible space of the future. So let's say that people actually do reduce the amount of cars that they need or use in the community, then you have a little bit of flexible space to do some of the rusty, messy things that you have to do over the life of a building, bring in new materials to do renovations and construction. You can take over some parking spaces within your facility because you've left a little bit of flexible space in order to be able to do that. So I have a great deal of concern when we lock it so tightly down. But I think in this neighborhood, we do have the supports in place for transit options, and people will be warned when coming into the neighborhood that there is limited parking available in this space. There's no question at night, if you wander through this neighborhood, that the spillover up Glen Air, the spillover to the east, and the whole Bowser neighborhood, it's very hard to find parking spaces in the community already. But I think that at 1.5 stalls per as a total number, it's actually nowhere near our least generous zones. I think we go down to 0.82 stalls per unit in some cases. So I don't find this to be an example of a very low parking ratio. So I will be supportive of this change at this time. Are there any other speakers on the matter? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion is carried with Councillor Murray opposed. Okay, the next item, 8.2. I actually have a member of the public signed up to speak directly to this item. And so is Dana Gilbert here in the room with us or online?
I'm online.
Oh, there you go. I see you online. And yes, I can hear you clearly. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the council.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And Mayor Little and respected members of council, I apologize. You can see that I'm in, there's an exit sign behind me and I apologize. I'm in transit right now. I'm on the island working on one of our First Nation projects and I wasn't able to be with you all tonight. And I apologize as such. But I want to let you know, my name is Dana Gilbert. I work for a company called Forum Asset Management. I'm the managing director of real estate development. We have been in development for over 30 years. And we are one of Canada's largest owners, operators, and developers of purpose-built student accommodation. It's better known as student housing or traditionally known as student housing, but purpose-built student accommodation is very different in that it is created in a very different type of way with different types of units and self-contained units, as well as a very generous amenity package. We have a site with our partners, Lotus Capital Corporation, at 1574 and 1590 Hunter Street. And so we have had numerous conversations with planning as well as with members of council to deliver a purpose-built student accommodation at this site that would deliver anywhere from 550 to 650 beds in that project. So I'm speaking on concern of the proposed amenity cost charges. So when we purchased these lands and when we entered into a partnership, we underwrote those lands on the previous CAC's amenities, which typically had been exempted from CACs if it's a purpose-built rental. And so now this new ACC bylaw, while we wholly expect to prepare, we are fully prepared to pay DCCs and firm believers that growth should pay for growth. These new ACCs have been built upon a per unit number. And so as opposed to a square feet or GFA, I would say, and then also in terms of it being purpose-built student rental, no longer do those CACs apply. And as such, because it's a per unit fee and this type of purpose-built student accommodation, which we are in talks in partnership with in support of Capital University, this type of housing solution, which is a housing solution for students, actually frees up traditional housing for other demographics. And so those ACCs being by per unit to this project would amount to an additional $15 to $20 million and render this project unfeasible. A housing type that would really assist with housing, with alleviating the housing crisis and freeing up traditional housing. And so I wanted to talk about that in terms of the ACCs and ask that purpose-built student accommodation be considered for an exemption under this bylaw, and that we're prepared, even in those circumstances, to register a covenant on title that restricts its use to only students and that land to only be used for purpose-built student accommodation going forward. A housing type that everyone really needs, and this will fill a deficit, a significant deficit in the community and in the North Shore.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Dana Gilbert. Okay, next we are proceeding on item 8.2, proposed development cost charges. I believe we have initial comments from Mr. Daniluk from Finance.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council authorized the proposed development charges to be shared with the public in June before coming back to a regular meeting on July 9th, where Council gave first 3 readings to both bylaws. This enabled staff to review the charges with the province before coming back for second and third reading tonight. Following tonight, the DCC bylaw will be submitted to the Inspector of Municipalities for final approval before both bylaws are brought back to Council for adoption. As the province is now taking up to 8 weeks for this approval, bylaw adoption may take place in late November or even early December. So there is still some time for development applications to be submitted and be subject to the old rates. The proposed development charges help ensure growth pays for growth. Otherwise, existing ratepayers will pay these costs. The charges also provide more certainty to both the district and developers and are aligned with the new provincial housing legislation. The charges can't favor one land use over another. In-stream development applications will be protected so long as a complete application has been submitted prior to adoption of the bylaws and a building permit is issued or subdivision is granted within 1 year of bylaw adoption. To address a couple of the questions that came up during public input and just before this item, on the issue of regional DCCs, I agree that regional DCCs are an important tool for financing growth, and will continue to engage with Metro Vancouver and Translate to ensure their rates are adjusted over time to meet these regional needs. The analysis shared earlier during public input relates to Metro Vancouver's liquid waste DCC charge, which is something we're also seeking an update on, but is unrelated to the bylaws before Council tonight. The issue of student accommodation, of course, just came up as well. And this type of housing would be considered exempt if it falls within any class of affordable housing prescribed by regulation. Otherwise, Council can still consider requests on a case-by-case basis concurrently with the zoning amendment bylaw. And Mr. Milburn might have more to add to that.
Mr. Milburn?
Well, thank you very much, Your Worship, for the opportunity to comment. There are many different parameters that go into CAC, pardon me, what will become an amenity cost charge discussion. There's a general prohibition against waiving or reducing CCs, DCCs and ACCs, amenity cost charges. However, there are very specifically prescribed defined types of housing that those fees can be waived or reduced for. Additionally, if amenities are provided on site, the fees can be reduced, and that includes youth facilities, recreation facilities, and so on. So that comes down to the negotiation of the rezoning of the property. And then finally, the province has recently amended the Local Government Act to allow for negotiations for affordable and special needs housing to be accommodated through a sort of a revised density bonusing scheme. So that's another option to be considered as part of this discussion. All of that to say that there's a complex conversation about the applicability of the amenity charge to this, what is just now a proposal. And once we have the application in place, we can work through all those various opportunities and come back with a recommendation for Council on the applicability of the amenity charge. Thank you.
Just to be clear, so the reference that Mr. Daniluk, you made to sewerage charges as an example, that's just going to go towards the local pipes that we run in sewerage. It is not actually a relationship to the water mains, sewage mains, the larger infrastructure that traverses our community. That's a different fund. Is that correct?
That's correct. The charges before you tonight are applicable to our network, our local network.
Thank you very much. Okay, Council, I see Councillor Forbes. You have a motion for me?
A motion and a question. Motion and a question. I will move the recommendation, but I'd like to add on just a paragraph. It won't alter any of the recommendations that are here.
Okay. Prepared to clerk to hear. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to add on, I move all these recommendations, but I'd like to add on that when DCC charges are reviewed for 2025, staff to include all costs specifically to the North Shore wastewater treatment plant and show the percentage of DCC proportion to existing ratepayers and the percentage to growth. This is to ensure, as per our policy, that growth pays for growth.
Okay, I just want to be clear about one aspect, because I think you can ask for that information, that's all fine. But I just want to go back to what I think staff are trying to make a distinction between our local DCC and Metro Vancouver's DCC. So the decision before us tonight is not about Metro Vancouver's DCC, but you're saying that you want additional information so that in future, when we're considering rate changes, we have information for both in front of us.
Yep.
Is that understood by staff that that's the request? Okay. Okay, is there a seconder for that matter, for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Murian. Okay, on the motion, Councillor Forbes? Do you have any additional comments on the motion?
No.
Okay,
On the whole
Councillor
motion?
Murian? Yeah.
You want all DCC? The whole motion, not just the addition?
It's because she was the first one to move the motion, she can move it with the additional information in it. That's all fine.
Yeah. So growth probably should have started paying for growth a long time ago. We're kind of late, in my opinion, but we're going to do our best to try to get there going forward. The challenge is the cost of growth is so enormous in this region, and the cost of living is so out of whack that it's hard to adjust. My premise has always been on this OCP that the OCP is the driver of all of these costs. And I think last year in our budget, we talked about maintaining our operations. And I questioned that paragraph in the budget and asked, what are we talking about? Mowing the lawns, sweeping the streets, making sure, you know, the bathrooms in the parks are looked after and maintained. And it actually meant the operation of fulfilling the vision of the OCP. A document for me that was always considered a living document, flexible, subject to change. I feel more and more now that it is written in stone, and it is for us to implement the OCP. To the fullest prescription of how it was laid out. We identified areas in the OCP so developers had certainty, and we asked BC Assessment 3 times in 2010 if they would tax highest and best use on those areas of development in the municipality, and 3 times they said no. And then what did they do? They tacked on highest and best use. I've also been asking for years the cost of replacements for all the amenities that we're implementing. We're a community with great wealth and a lot of stuff, and all that stuff needs to be replaced, and the taxpayers are going to pay for that replacement. And I think we have to look carefully at what we're trying to achieve, because right now a lot of people feel like this community is the most unaffordable place it's ever been. And I see those costs just going up. Now, DCCs are the pipes in the ground, as Mayor Little has confirmed for the audience. And I agree, we absolutely have to pay for those costs. It's expensive, it's complex work. We have aging infrastructure, and we need to deal with that. I question the legislation that's been applied in regards to ACCs. And I think we have to look very closely within our review of what the costs are going forward when we talk about our OCP review later in this agenda, what that's going to cost our community. I've been asking for a number of years, and I still don't think I have the answer. Things are just going up. Metro Vancouver's charges, and we're dealing with the budget shortly. We're going to be talking about the budgets and the development cost charges that haven't been complete across the board. There were not all development cost charges. Water was just recently added. And again, we look to the past and think, why did we just add it now? Why wasn't it always part of the equation? And I'll take my other 2 minutes. Can you allow me that? For the costs of housing, and we keep talking about a crisis, I think we've kind of lost that battle, actually. If the province of British Columbia had focused affordability, true affordability, and social housing within this legislation, I think a lot more people could get on board with the costs. But when we're talking simply about volume and more stuff to accommodate wealthy development. I'm not sure that's sustainable going forward, and I'm not sure we're doing our kids any favors. I will ask the question in public to be able to address some concerns that were brought forward by residents. For those projects that are in stream right now, Mr. Danilot, how is this large number, ACCs and DCCs, doubling, or DCCs being, with ACCs attached, we're looking at up to towards $80,000 for a single family lot being subdivided. And then if you tack on Metro Vancouver's rates that were probably too low to begin with, I think single family is looking at another 30 grand. Where are they in this process? Please stop my clock.
Through your worship, Councillor Mary, where are, sorry.
Is this number going to apply to them in regards to, say, a single family subdivision? Are these ACCs and DCCs that we're going to pass tonight, are they going to be passed on to property owners that are in stream right now?
No, so any development applications that are completed and submitted prior to the adoption of the bylaw, which is now likely towards the end of November, they would be in-stream protected under the existing rates.
And how long do they have?
If they have their development application in submitted before adoption, they have a year to submit their building permit. And there is some flexibility with the ACC bylaw as well that goes beyond that, but it gets a little complicated. But
thank you. There's your public answer, Mr. Machin. I think the other thing that council is going to need to look at, and the Rec Commission is going to be bringing forward a report for council's consideration in regards to our needs assessment. And it's going to be, what else do we need? That's going to be a big question. What else do we need? What kind of expectations are we, does the community have for the future? And what is that going to cost 200,000 people on the North Shore? If there was, over the years, certainly since I've been in this chair, there's been a discussion about amalgamation. If there was ever a time for a really big community discussion on amalgamation, it's now, because these costs are ballooning exorbitantly, and development is not getting cheaper. Land values are not getting cheaper. The cost of infrastructure is not getting cheaper. We're pricing people out of this community, and I don't know how we can continue going forward raising taxes like we did last year to 7 or 7.5% and allow the majority of us to remain in this community. We are spending way, way too much money, and development should have paid for development 20 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Just my own comments on the matter. Again, this has been sort of foisted upon municipalities by a change in legislation from the provincial government. They have brought forward bills 44, 46, and 47. 46 dictated a new regime for recovering costs from development for communities. I have to say that there wasn't adequate consultation done with the municipalities. That's been echoed by the Union of BC Municipalities and the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, that they weren't given adequate consultation on that process. The net result is that one of the tools that we used to use to produce quite a significant amount of affordable housing in our community was taken away and replaced with this. And so we used to be able to accrue waived charges from multiple units in order to be able to and use CACs and contributions to be able to really produce some affordable housing units in new developments that come to our community. Now the only tool that we have is the ability to waive the ACC, but the ACC is on its own, on one unit, is a relatively small benefit, and it's not significant enough to provide what I would call affordable housing in our community. And so this, unfortunately, was pressed upon us by the provincial government, and I don't think they did adequate consultation in the community. And Councillor Hanson, you said some things along those lines at the time. It's very frustrating because we lost the tool that we used to produce affordable housing, and now we have to come in with a new system. And the transition is very hard for people who have developments in stream or on the way. the people that definitely benefited from this were the people who already had the land assembled and already had agreements in place. But for new developments coming forward, it's going to be very hard to produce affordable units with the new system. So while I am not supportive of what the provincial government has done in bringing in bills 46 specifically, I do recognize that the District of North Vancouver has to make sure that it can provide the services to our community. And the only way to do that is to adequately cover our costs back by having our own policy with an adequate amount of resources funded back to the municipality. So I will be supportive of the presentation here and Councillor Forbes's motion. Next speaker I have is Councillor Pope, followed by Councillor Back. Councillor Pope, your comments, please.
Thank you very much. Of course, I agree that growth should pay for growth. However, we have an affordability crisis, and I'm concerned about increasing DCCs. Not on single family homes, but on all other types of housing. Because it seems to me that if we're wanting to increase density, we should be incentivizing things like coach houses and infill housing. And instead, it will just be even more expensive and less affordable. And it was outlined perfectly from a letter from a citizen today who wrote us about the fact that his family wanted to build a coach house. And they were looking at 500 grand right off the top just to build it. And so they added in another 50,000 to the budget for all of the permits and development application fees and all of those other things. And then with the proposed ACC DCC rates, adding on to their monthly mortgage payment would go up another $3,400. And so it's getting completely out of range for for them to rent it out to anybody on an affordable basis. So that's just like one example of where I think this is going wrong and how we should be looking at the bigger picture of affordability and trying to manage it. And I'm also very concerned about student housing. We heard tonight earlier from the developer of that project down on Hunter Street. And I've had a look at this, at the sort of draft version of this project, and it's purpose-built 550 to 600 micro units only for students with a covenant that they're agreeable to, that it would only be for students. And we heard her say that, they purchased this land assuming the old DCCs were in place. And this will increase it by $15 to $20 million and not make it feasible. So we do need more student housing. We do need projects like this. And I would like to see purpose-built student housing exempt from any DCC increase. In addition to, reworking the increases planned for coach houses, apartments, infill housing, and townhouses. So I can't vote in favor of this to move forward at the moment because of that. And indeed, I would like to see it. I would like to have a discussion in a workshop so we can ask more questions about it and have more discussion about how we might be able to achieve some level of affordability through our DCCs and ACCs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I have Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on the coach houses, I believe there was some discussion about phasing that in, and we're not able to do that, as I understand. Could staff please comment on why that is? Obviously, I agree with what Councillor Pope said as far as incentivizing the type of housing that we want to see built. And I think that there is general agreement around the table that coach houses do create that sort of housing for intergenerational parents and their adult kids to stay living in the district. And I'm just curious as to whether or not we can provide an incentive that way through the DCC for coach houses.
I'm looking to, Mr. Daniluk, go ahead.
Through Your Worship to Councillor Back. It's correct. We did propose a phase in. It wasn't supported by the province. They deemed it to be assistance. So we reviewed the impacts based on the limited information we have at this point. There's just over 20 coach houses in the district. Now the potential for up to 17 or over 17,000 more according to the information presented by staff in June. Obviously, it won't, the coach houses won't proceed at that pace. It's just the potential. So based on the information we have to date, we recommended a rate of 75% of the apartment rate. That's $34,000, not 45. And it's still significantly lower than Burnaby's $56,000 for their laneway house. But according to the legislation, you can't provide assistance to one land use type over another. And so you have to use the same approach.
Through your worship, how do we compare to the city of North Van in terms of our charge for coach houses?
Like many municipalities, they haven't yet organized themselves. I think they're aiming for Q2 of next year. There are other points to consider. The ACC bylaw can be or must be amended before the end of next year. And so there's opportunities to make other changes, especially for the two concerns raised tonight with student housing and with coach houses. There will be opportunities for change. And until then, council can still consider requests on a case-by-case basis, concurrently with the zoning amendment bylaw. Mr. Milburn.
Can I just clarify that? So because we don't have to comply with the provincial legislation until the end of 2025, you're saying that council has the discretion to apply either policy? Is that?
No, once the bylaw is adopted,
yeah,
the ACCs will be in effect through Mr. Milburn's office, and in concurrence with the zoning amendment bylaw, council can consider other requests. And so Mr. Milburn can speak to that better than I can at this stage.
I just wanted to clarify until the end of 2025, and then at the end of 2025, we have to be in full compliance with the provincial rules, which don't allow waiving things.
My understanding is that by the end of 2025, all of the zoning amendments need to be adopted.
Mr. Milburn, additional comments?
Yeah, so the way that the transition work is it's designed and intended not to double dip. So we wouldn't have negotiated and have agreed to community amenity contributions and then ask those same people to pay amenity cost charges. So their existing agreements and negotiated agreements would continue to apply, and that's reflected in the Act. The one point of clarification I think is important in terms of the student housing is the letter received by Forum specifically says they had not factored in an amenity cost charge. So they had obviously considered implications of changes to development cost charges, but it's the amenity cost charge. So the policy in place now, and was at the time that they were looking to acquire the property, is 75% of the lift in land value as a result of rezoning is what we negotiate for under council's CAC policy. So presumably they would have calculated that into their assessment. And they looked at that, and they've proposed various densities up to 8.5 FSR. So there's obviously quite a significant change in their concepts that they've presented so far. If council is concerned about the ACC impacts, so the amenity cost charge impacts to this concept, it's not an application yet, staff would recommend a referral to staff, and then we could report back on options and discussion. And that way that the development cost charges and other things could continue to flow through the approval process through the provincial government. And then we can come back with further advice for council in the future.
Mr. Milburn, Councillor Back.
Thank you very much for your explanation. I would be supportive of that. I mean, I think this purpose-built student housing is a real need in our community. And, you know, it seems pretty clear that a project like this won't move forward based on what's being proposed here. And then as far as the coach houses, that's more on the DCC side. So I don't know. I feel like what we're doing tonight is not going to incentivize anybody to build any more coach houses. And we've seen such little uptake already in the over decade that we've allowed them in the district. We're just making it more restrictive by adding these sort of costs that just will make it prohibitive for the vast majority of people that want to build them.
Thank you very much. Councillors Hanson and Ma. Councillor Hanson, your comments.
Yeah, thank you very much. I suppose I just want to frame the discussion by saying this topic was discussed, if I recall correctly, in a workshop, then coming into first reading on July the 9th. The only change from what we all voted for on July the 9th was at that time we had the phase in for the coach house. Now we have the idea that coach houses pay 75% of the apartment rate. And I think it was always, if I recall correctly, understood that we were going to be monitoring this as it goes, considering new information that we expected would be coming our way, such as the student housing situation, and that it would be a subject of further discussion and further analysis. So I am going to be voting for it, just as I did at first reading on July the 9th. But I do hope that we continue to study the subject and make sure that we are incentivizing the housing we want and arrive at a workable system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ma, your comments?
Yes, first, I support Councillor Forbes' amendment as it will provide some additional transparency in the Metro Vancouver taxes that are imposed upon district residents. And I'm sorry, I just wanted some additional clarification from Mr. Daniluk. If I heard correctly, if we want to provide some incentive for people to build laneway houses for that soft densification, they are to come back to council on a one-off basis, or we would consider them on a one-off basis?
Through your worship, Councillor Ma, when I made reference to that, I was speaking to the student housing topic that came up, not to coach houses.
Okay. So
when it comes to the subject of coach houses, you can't provide assistance to one land use over another. So you have to apply the same methodology in coming up with the rates.
So this help me here. What category is lumped in with coach houses? Apartments and coach houses, or?
The province, because they're unique, we separated them in the table. If you look at the table and the bylaws, coach houses is now a unique line. And previously it was grouped with the apartment rate. So the charge would have been higher. Staff recommended a phasing in of the coach house rate before, but the province didn't support that. And so we had to come up with a revised proposed rate. And based on the limited information we have right now, we proposed a rate that's 75% of the apartment rate.
Which is the 45,000?
The apartment rate's 45,000, so the coach house rate would be 34,000.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pope.
Sorry, I'm still confused. And I think there's a lot of confusion around the table. And that's why I think it should move out of here and into a workshop to review again. It's not clear at all, what's going to happen with this student housing if we move forward with it. And I would hate to see this project that is so visionary just fall by the wayside because we were unable to find a way to exempt them for this particular situation. So yeah, again, if we have until the end of next year, then why don't we just work on it some more and get it right?
Very much. Councillor Hanson, that may be from before. Was that from before?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, so again, this is the problem with the new provincial legislation. The legislation ties our hands. We used to be able to take CAC funds from one project and apply them to another. So if student housing was identified as a priority for the District of North Vancouver, then you could have taken the CAC uplift from this development and you could have built the student housing within this project, or you could have built the student housing at the university where they have plans to produce 2,000 units in their campus master plan. And so again, this is taking the flexibility out of the system for us. It means that we can only have the benefits apply directly to the unit that is that you would waive the ACC on, rather than allowing us the flexibility of accumulating the benefit and using it to target it somewhere in the community where we wanted to provide it. So again, just expressing my absolute frustration that the provincial government didn't do proper consultation with municipalities. We could have easily identified this as being a challenge for delivering affordable housing and specialized housing in our community. Councillor Beck, second time.
Just to clarify, though, we don't actually have to update these charges until the end of next year. Is that right?
Mr. Dallin?
The last time the development charge program was reviewed was 2018.
Okay.
It was intended to go forward in 2022. We've only made a minor inflation adjustment since then. So it's long past due that the program be updated so we can keep pace with the charges and collect the appropriate amounts to ensure growth pays for growth. So I would recommend for that reason proceeding. The other consideration is as we move into capital planning, it's very important that the bylaws and the calculations that are underpinning those bylaws are reflected in your capital plan, which we're about to start a process with council and the public on.
Okay.
Councillor Beck?
It still seems to me that we haven't quite landed on the right policy. It really kind of goes against the sort of projects and housing that we should be incentivizing. So I'm still, and I know that, at first reading that there was support around the table for this, but that's why we have time in between to think about it. And certainly when, new information like a unique project like the student housing one comes forward, we can take another look at it. And I don't feel like this is going to, it would be a shame for that to prohibit those kind of projects from proceeding. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes?
If I could refer back to what Mr. Milburn said, we could go through with the DCC charges. We could do that and we could split off the ACC for further discussion in a workshop. And I'm hearing Mr. Daniluk say that we can deal with the student housing separately because it's not part of the lumped in section that the province has prescribed. So I think the longer we take to implement DCCs, as Mr. Daniluk said, we already weren't charging enough. So there's a risk in there, and the longer we delay putting the DCCs in place, the greater the risk will be, the greater the cost will be to taxpayers. So I would be amenable to amending that we just deal with the DCCs tonight and we refer the ACCs to a workshop for further discussion.
I'm willing to bifurcate the motion and then based on that decision, decide whether we're splitting them or not. But if a majority of the council wants to proceed tonight as it is, it proceeds tonight as it is. Okay. Councillor Mah.
Sorry, just talking about, thank you, Mr. Daniluk, for reminding us that last time DCCs were really reviewed was in 2018. So we are potentially losing money, but at the same time, current costs are so high that, some projects may not move forward. And now we're thinking about increasing costs. This a point of clarification. If the DCC rate for coach houses was hypothetically set at 50% of what apartment is, does that mean that other housing forms are paying up, going to make up for that gap? I just want to try to understand if the rate was set lower for coach houses to incentivize coach houses, is it made up somewhere else?
Through your worship, Councillor Mah, and the way the calculations work is you look at the impact from that land use, generally based on population. And so when you're looking at the various types of land uses, population is the big driver for most of the charges. And so the general assumption in the region is that the apartment rate and the coach house rate are very similar. Because it's so new to the District of North Vancouver, we took the position that until we have better information, we'll recommend a charge at 75% of the apartment rate, even though they're expected to perform similarly. There are other considerations as well, though, with the coach house.
Your worship, if I may just add to that, I believe the question was, who else would pay if not for the benefiter, right? So the person who's receiving the development. And I believe it would be following on the tax levy in essence. It would be the general taxpayer that have to pay, because we can't take the costs from one category and place them on other categories in the DCC. So it would have to be made up through grants or tax levy or some other way to fund that capital cost.
That's correct. But if you did provide additional assistance, that assistance would have to be applied evenly to all of the land uses.
Right, but if I heard correctly earlier, we set the DCC rate at 75%. Sorry, for coach houses at 75% of apartments. And if we got what, 43 coach houses out of 17,000. And if we believe that coach houses is a way for that soft densification, which will still preserve the character of our neighborhood, you know, we might want to look at that again. But thank you, Dan and Rick, for the explanation. But it's food for thought, and we really have to decide what we want to incentivize in our community. So if this is split, I would support that, or bifurcate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hanson, do you have additional comments?
Well, just to say on the coach house point, I remember at this table, pardon me?
Just that extraneous noise.
I remember we did talk about this, and I remember making the point that if we had an artificially low rate for coach houses, we're effectively subsidizing people who want to build coach houses or people who own single family homes. And I made the point that perhaps they are not the equity group that we seek to subsidize. So it is a topic of some complexity. And as I said, I'm content to vote through these charges on the understanding that there's an exemption for the student housing, which I gather there is, and on the understanding that we're going to be following it closely and be amenable to change. And I certainly would be interested in continued discussion of this, another workshop, because it's a complicated subject, and I think it would reward us to continue to consider it. Thank you.
So just been clarifying some things with the clerk here. I was quick to say that I can just simply bifurcate it. We'd vote on one and then decide what we're going to do with the second one. I want to be very careful not to step into a bit of a trap here. If we defeat second and third reading, then we actually can't refer the matter to a workshop at that time. And so probably the best way to do it would be, if there was consensus that the DCCs need to be updated, as Mr. Daniluk has said, then we move that portion forward for second and third reading as one motion. And then we consider whether we're going to refer items, the other item, to a workshop for further consultation. Sure. And so we don't want to accidentally defeat second and third without a course of action, because then we would actually have to start that portion of the process all over again, which nobody wants. And so, what I'm inclined to do is vote on the DCCs and then stop. And then on your motion, your wording, that's fine. That can go. And then we stop. And then we have a second motion as to whether or not we're going to refer the ACC portion back to a workshop. Because on that one, if we accidentally defeat, the whole thing dies and staff have to start it all over again. I'm seeing some nods. Okay, so then the first question is Councillor Forbes's additional request for DCC information the next time we have the discussion, plus the original motion that is written in the package that development cost charges bylaw 8704/2024 is given second and third reading, just the development cost charge portion. So is that clear that that's what we're voting on first? And we're not having a re-debate about it. We've already spoken on it, but I just want to make sure that that's clear that what we're voting on first. Okay, I'm going to call the question on that. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries with Councillors Pope and Back opposed. Okay, then on the second piece, that the amenity cost charges bylaw 8705/2024 is given second reading and then the subsequent comment third reading. I will put forward the motion that that be referred to a workshop for further consideration. I think Councillor Hanson, you indicated you would second that. I'll call that as a question if that's clear to everybody. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion is carried. So the ACC piece is carried forward to a workshop. We'll have staff follow up with potential dates for that discussion. But it does seem to be that there is some flexibility in the implementation of that ACC piece, and we'll get clarity on that at that time. Okay, thank you very much, Council. The next item up for discussion is item 8.3. This is Congestion and Curbside Management Permit Program Update. And I'm looking to staff for a comment. Mr. Cohen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So some background to the staff report. In March of 2020, Council at the district adopted new bylaws to participate in an intermunicipal business license for ride hailing. In addition to this, a new permit type was also introduced, and that was the Congestion and Curbside Management Permit. This permit is designed to address the impacts of ride hailing services on both curbside management and traffic congestion within the district. Over the past couple of years, the program's operation and the permit fees collected have amounted to approximately $40,000, reflecting a consistent increase in pickup and drop-off activity. Staff in their report are proposing that 2/3 of the congestion and curbside management permit fees that are collected be directed to support seniors rideshare programs and the remainder to be allocated to other transportation initiatives for residents. Also to note is that staff are also collaborating closely with our City of North Vancouver colleagues to coordinate an increase potentially for CCMP fees in 2025. We have staff here available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, I see Councillor Hanson's hand followed by Councillor Back. Oh, that's from before. Councillor Back, your comments and a motion, please.
I'll be moving the recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Second for discussion. Councillor Back, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm happy to support that the funds raised from the ride hailing permits go back to support transportation initiatives in our community. And I see that staff are proposing to redirect a portion of these funds to programs like seniors rideshare programs, which I think are becoming increasingly more important, particularly of late when we see that Handy Dart service has been disrupted. So that these funds go to Parkgate Society, Silver Harbor, and Capilano Community Services, I think is a good use of the funds. And, you know, I think that people that need different ways of getting around should benefit from the ride hailing services that are in our community and that permit money.
Thank you very much, Councillor Back. I agree. I think that it's an appropriate reuse of those funds. I remember when we had the initial discussion when ride hailing was implemented, that there was going to be potential revenue from it. And in some municipalities, it's an incredibly significant amount of revenue. Ours is a little more modest, but you know, what we were concerned about at the time was obviously the impact on the taxi community and other services like that in the community. But we wanted to make sure that the public was getting a benefit since their curbside space was going to be taken up for these private purposes. And so we've built this sort of financial feedback loop to compensate the community for the impact on it. One thing that I would really like to highlight in this, and I hope Councillor Back is amenable to it and staff are amenable to it, is that one of the big losses of moving from the taxi as the primary first call was that it really eroded the accessibility issue with the taxis. And so taxi drivers, an example, are trained to pick up persons with disabilities in our community. They have a fare saver program to help assist people use the taxi service to get around the community. Handy Dart is something you really have to plan in advance for. People who aren't exposed may not know that, but you quite often will have to book 2 or 3 weeks in advance, and it's very inflexible. You can't spontaneously just head to a movie or some other thing that so many people in our community already enjoy. And so the taxis and the partnership with the taxis was something that we benefited from. They got sort of a pseudo protected monopoly in the community, and we got additional supports and services to support persons with disabilities in our community. So while I'm happy to support Councillor Back's motion, I would like to just put in there, and maybe you and I could chat about it offline and maybe talk with staff about it, Is there a way to make sure that we're all supporting persons with disabilities who need to be able to get around our community, either through enhanced fare saver program or something that assists people with those kind of spontaneous trips that ride hailing services can't provide at the same level as a taxi service. So, but I will be supportive of this. Is there any other speakers on the matter? Councillor Mong?
Sorry, just looking at my notes from a couple of weeks ago. If I can ask a couple of questions, just for clarification first. I think the fees were collected starting about 4 years ago, and the current balance is about 40,000. Has any of the proceeds been used in the past 4 years?
I'm sorry, Councilor Mong, could you repeat the question?
Just looking at my notes. The permit fees have been collected for about 4 years, and the current balance is about 40,000. If that's correct, has any of the proceeds been used in the past 4 years?
Through your worship, Councillor Ma, just to clarify, so the IMBL business license amendments were implemented in 2020. However, due to COVID, the actual start of the CCMP permit fee collection started about 2 years after that. And to date, we haven't reallocated any of these funds. So we're coming to council for the request today.
Okay, just a follow-up question, another question. I'm okay with the proposed allocation of permit fees to the senior rideshare program. I think it's, can you explain or help me to understand the rationale behind the proposed CCMP fee increase from 10 cents to 60 cents? That's a significant increase. And I'm just wondering, like, from my experience, most drivers of these ride-hailing services are doing it as a second job to help ends meet, to make ends meet. How would this increased fee impact the average driver?
Through your worship, Councillor Ma, just to clarify, we were just providing some examples of what other jurisdictions had increased their fees to. At present, the discussions with the City of North Vancouver, we have not actually made any decisions regarding a fee increase and what that would look like. Our recommendation would probably be a tiered approach, but certainly the rate of pickup and drop-offs are, in terms of volume, are not as big as the City of Vancouver. So I do not think that that would garner the same high fee that the City of Vancouver has implemented at this time.
Okay. Just on that point, do you have any information, even anecdotal, how the increase in what ride hailing has positively or negatively impacted congestion or traffic on the North Shore? I'm just wondering what kind of impact it's having.
Through your worship, Councillor Ma, at this time, I couldn't state any anecdotal evidence about an impact to congestion. However, in the report, it is reflected that we have seen an increase in ride-hailing activity within the city and district, and a noted increase in the use of zero-emission vehicles as well in the program, which is incredibly positive. So this is just one of the tools in our toolbox when it comes to trying to get people out of single occupancy vehicles and try use other forms of transportation options that are available to them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ma. I see no further speakers on the matter. Councillor Miri, your comments?
I just have how do we gather data in regards to how much of an increase in ride hailing has happened?
Through your worship, Councillor Mary, the companies that we have issued CCMP permits to provide a monthly remittance of pickup and drop-off. So we get the numbers every single month with breakdown by vehicles. So zero emission vehicles, as well as regular internal combustion engine vehicles, as well as vehicles equipped with facilities to accommodate people with disabilities. And every single month they provide a report to us, as well as a remittance of fees, and the fees are deposited or through to our finance department.
So it's a 10-cent fee for pickup and then a 10-cent fee for drop off?
Correct. So for internal combustion engine vehicles, it is 10 cents. For zero emission vehicles, and
5?
is 5. Yeah,
0 for discount for accessible vehicles like Handy Dart?
correct. Yeah.
So Handy Dart and then Uber and then taxi cabs, all of those?
Yeah, no, so Handy is we're just ride hailing companies right now. So Uber and Lyft are the main companies that operate within this permit
But not
space.
the taxis?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. And what's the volume that we're seeing? Like, I would think that there's quite a bit of volume in the city on the weekends, in the summer. You know, all the nightclubs are gone. I guess you can stay at some of the bars late, but, so I'm just wondering what kind of volume we're looking at.
Well, per month, we're experiencing on the high end up to 32,000 pickup and drop offs.
Per month?
Yeah.
In the district?
Yep. And that has, indicated with the graph on page 2, just a really good drop off and pickup frequency indication.
Okay. Okay, well, it seems like a small amount and it does go to good community services. So, yeah, okay. All right.
Right. I see no further speakers on the matter at this time. Prepared to call the question? All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion is carried. Thank you very much, Council. Okay. Moving on to item 8.4, the official community plan update and engagement plan. And our staff are just getting into position. Yeah. Sure. Welcome. When you're ready, floor is yours.
Members of council. Okay, now I'm on. My name is Jessica Lee. I'm a community planner with the Community Planning Department. I'm here tonight to provide a brief presentation on the official community plan update engagement plan for council's consideration and endorsement. The engagement plan includes 3 phases that would take place this year throughout 2025, and it was developed to align with the project work plan previously presented to council, as well as the deadline set by the province. Although the district is subject to tight timelines from the province, staff are hopeful to provide a meaningful and robust engagement process to gain community input and support on any potential changes that may result in the community. The district is required to update its OCP and zoning bylaw by December 31st, 2025, as part of a series of recent provincial legislative changes. And I won't go too into detail on these changes, as we've already discussed some of them today, but it is important to highlight that these updates to the OCP and zoning bylaw will be required every 5 years. And there will be a greater emphasis on public consultation during these updates, given that public hearings are now prohibited for individual residential development proposals that are consistent with the OCP land use. In consideration of these changes, staff had presented a work plan at the July 15th council workshop. 7 focus areas were discussed, including identifying our 20-year housing needs, exploring appropriate locations for residential growth, aligning the OCP with the transit-oriented area designations, updating land use designations, exploring new and updated affordable housing tools, modernizing OCP policies, and developing a new regional context statement to align with the Metro Vancouver 2050 regional growth strategy. Another important component that was discussed was creating a public engagement plan, which is the focus of the remainder of this presentation. In order to update the OCP, the district must consider the consultation requirements of the Local Government Act. Local governments must provide appropriate opportunities for consultations with persons, organizations, and authorities that council considers to be affected by an amendment to the OCP. More specifically, consideration must be given to whether these opportunities should be early and ongoing, and also specifically which organizations, entities, or authorities should be consulted. A public hearing must also be held on any proposed OCP bylaw amendments. Other aspects to consider when developing a public engagement plan include the tight deadlines required by the province, previously identified work plans, as well as available resources to do this work. As a result, 3 public engagement phases were developed in consultation with our communications department. The first phase will build broad awareness of the OCP update process, the district's 20-year housing needs, and potential changes in the community that may result to accommodate this housing need. Updates to our housing needs report are still underway and will be brought to council later this fall. Depending on the 20-year housing needs identified in the report, significant changes to our community may need to be considered. Any potential changes would still respect the existing vision and urban structure of our current OCP, but some things that may be considered might include revisiting densities within our existing growth centers, adding density along key transit corridors, increasing densities on sites to preserve heritage resources, and considering additional infill housing in our single-family neighborhoods. To build this awareness, staff will undertake both print and digital communication strategies to reach a wide audience, including a dedicated project webpage, mailouts, social media, and outreach to various interest holders, community organizations, and district committees. The second phase of engagement will gather feedback on potential land use scenarios, as well as associate potential policy and regulatory changes. The land use scenarios will be a key focus of this engagement, as they will identify feasible options for locating future growth across the district that meet the identified 20-year housing needs, alongside the district's transportation, infrastructure, and financial plans. Staff have retained a consultant to assist with the development and testing of these land use scenarios. To gather feedback from the public, staff are proposing several in-person and virtual engagement activities, including a series of in-person open houses in various locations across the district, a series of in-person pop-ups to provide informal opportunities to learn and ask questions, a virtual information session, which would be made available on the project webpage, and an online survey that will be also available as printed copies. Additional activities can be added as needed and as desired, and these activities and events will be broadcasted by various communication strategies, and a summary of the feedback received and activities will be provided to council at the end of this phase. This final third phase will primarily focus on promoting and publicizing the results of the engagement from phase 2 and next steps for the OCP update process, all of which will be supported by communication activities that have already been previously mentioned throughout other phases. Depending on the outcomes of phase 2, there may be additional engagement opportunities as needed and as time permits. It is also important to reiterate that these 3 phases I've just discussed are in addition to the public hearing requirement by the province. We will also be undertaking targeted and proactive engagement with First Nations and key interest holders. And some of these are listed on the slide here. And this includes Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam nations, adjacent municipalities, education and health authorities, and regional and provincial agencies. The nature and form of engagement will be determined at preliminary meetings and based on the individual preferences. There may also be other organizations or other groups not identified on this list that have expressed an interest in being involved throughout the engagement and have been involved in past work. Staff will accommodate the requests of these additional interest holders throughout this process. The 3 engagement phases will take place throughout the remainder of 2024 and throughout 2025, with targeted engagement with First Nations and key interest holders taking place concurrently. The proposed timelines of each phase, shown in green on the screen, have been designed to align with information needed to support the planning work and approximate timelines for reporting back to council, shown in the blue bar. Phase 1 is proposed to be initiated this October and run until early next year. Phase 2 will take place from February to April next year. And phase 3 is proposed to take place during the summer and fall of next year, with proposed bylaws being presented for council's consideration in the late fall. The proposed public engagement timeline and approach aligns with the greater OCP update planning work, complies with provincial deadlines and consultation requirements, and provides robust opportunities for meaningful input. And staff recommend that the public engagement plan be endorsed by council. That concludes my presentation, and staff are available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. You'll just to clarify something. So like we have a lot of stuff in theater right now as far as surveys on spirit trails, bike lanes, the budget process. We're really anticipating adding this in October to what we currently have in theater for consultation.
Your worship, I think the first phase, as Ms. Lee outlined, is primarily information and awareness. Basically, we're going to talk about how the requirements of the provincial government, how it's changed, and that this is a project upcoming that we can look forward to. So we'll start building out content on our webpage and get people interested and aware so that they know for the main part of the input and the feedback will be occurring in the spring.
Councillor Ma, you have a comment and a motion?
I will recommend I move the staff recommendation, but I also have some questions.
Yeah, is there a seconder for the staff recommendation? I'll support the staff recommendation. Go ahead, Councillor Ma.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm just looking at phase 2, gathering feedback. There's a whole list of activities. I'm just wondering, has communications considered having focus groups? I know we do a lot of, in-person open houses, pop-ups, virtual sessions, but probably at most you speak to someone for about 5 minutes. It's a very limited time. I'm just wondering, I know focus groups from my previous life can be quite expensive, but they could provide more in-depth discussions. I'm just wondering if that's been considered.
Mr. Milburn?
Thank you. Happy to have communications comment as well. I would say from my experience on OCP reviews, when we have a series of interested groups that we conduct outreach with, we often find that they act much like a focus group when we engage with them because they bring in their membership, their executive to come and speak to us. And they often have connections in through the community in many areas. Often people are on multiple boards. And so the discussions do often they have that kind of feel, that kind of opportunity as well in terms of receiving feedback by engaging specifically with these various interest groups, some of which were mentioned on the previous slide, but there's lots of others listed in the report. I'm not sure if communications wants to add any more to that, but I definitely think there's an opportunity there.
Through your worship, I think certainly the public and the resident part of the engagement, the plan is still very much in draft, and we're here to take some input, and any suggestions you have, we'll look into for sure.
Yeah, I just think at times there are people that want to talk a little more, and I'm glad there's some engagement. And on that point, I'm glad to see there's some engagement with our First Nation governments. And then also you mentioned key interest holders. And I looked through that list and, there's a lot of the usual groups, but are there other groups? Because there's some that are missing. Like I'm thinking, is there targeted engagement with the neighborhood associations or North Can? And I'm also curious to know if there's plans to engage the business task force. I was reading something, the economic development strategy serves as a 5-year blueprint to advance the district's official community plan. So are there plans to engage this group of, our business leaders in the community?
Mr. Milburn.
Thank you for raising that point. Often in these processes, other groups actually show up too. They express an interest in participating. So we would definitely be adding anyone with an interest that will be added essentially to the engagement. I think you've identified a couple of groups, community associations, as well as council committees are 2 groups that we would definitely reach out to and share information with and seek their feedback on this process. So the answer is yes to that question. I forget the second half of the question. I believe it was The business community. Yes, they will. We'll reach out to through our various channels in the business community. We've created some really good relationships through the development of the economic development strategy, and we'll continue to keep the folks that were involved in that process informed through this OCP review, because there are some key recommendations that came out of the economic development strategy that we'll be able to implement with this OCP and zoning bylaw update, and including looking at the zoning on the sort of commercial frontage in mixed use sites. That's a really important consideration for this. So that's just one of the items mentioned in the economic development strategy, but there will be others.
Yeah, and one more group, and I'll give a shameless plug for it. I'm on the library board, and this was brought up at UBCM. The role of the library has evolved in the last 5 to 10 years, and it's become a real key part of the community. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to either engage with the library board or potentially Friends of the Library.
Yes, and our conversations with the administration have already started.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, as the seconder, just want to comment on this. I mean, obviously we are required to do this. The provincial government's requiring us to update our OCP and update how we're going to handle the housing needs reports going forward, and potentially 20 years worth of potential growth in the community. You know, I'm hummed and hawed over what the appropriate way to do this with the OCP process is. I mean, if the document is to be defined by provincial legislation in terms of how many units we have to account for in it, it's very different from the OCP of old, where it really was community-based, local grassroots. And I kind of think, you know, we got to figure out how within this document to make the distinction, to show the community this is the area where we're seeking your input. This is the area where we want to be responsive and respectful to the community associations, and then highlight specifically, and this is the area where we're being forced to do this, or we don't have the flexibility on it, so that we can identify what's you know, locally decided on and what is a provincial decision, which they have the right to do. It's their policy. I think that it's going to seem disingenuous to go to the community and ask for their opinion, and they're going to come back and say, yeah, I don't think you should be putting all these these units in. And we're going to say, actually, we don't actually have a choice in that. And so the community is going to be under the impression that they're the ones forming the document when the bulk, the core of it is being defined by the province. I remember the last time we updated, or not last time we updated, when we brought in the new OCP in 2011. I joked about it in the early stages. I said, you know, you're going to have this entire document and process, and it's going to come down to the one paragraph that outlines the rate of growth. That's what the community is going to want to talk about. And in the second paragraph of page 17 of the original OCP, there it was. That was the number that was going to define growth. And it was absolutely true. All of the discussion that happened in that revolved around that. Everybody, you know, we generally saw the community as being, you know, we want to be safe, we want to be family friendly, we want to be close connections to nature. All of those things resounded with everybody. It represented a community that they wanted to see. And people came out in droves to say they didn't agree with the number on page 17. And so here we are, we're going to produce a new document, and page 17 is going to be written by the province of BC, not by us. And well, it won't be page 17, future document. But just to highlight that that's something that is not going to be community-based. It's going to be dictated to us, defined by us, by the provincial government, and we will have to implement it. And so I think those materials, those things should be handled differently in the document to make sure that the community knows that that is not locally based. And I guess, you know, furthermore, I want to follow up on that first point about the timing on this. We have so much in theater right now, and you have a provincial election on top of it. So I would look to staff for your advice on when to get this out there. Maybe, you know, after the Christmas break, when people are settling down again, maybe that's the time to have that broader discussion about it, so that we get good community engagement and feedback. But I think putting something in theater between here and the end of the year with all of the other pieces that are out there, I I don't know that that's a great use of our publication resources. But I'm generally in support of this. I think we have to do it anyway, but I'll be supportive of the motion before us. Councillor Murray, Pope, and back. Councillor Murray, your comments, please.
So under public engagement spectrum on page 139, we're in the consulting stage, and it says, we will keep you informed and listen to and acknowledge your concerns and aspirations in developing final solutions, and we will report back to you on how your input influenced the decision. But we have no ability to influence this. So that part of this is actually not right. We're telling people that we're going to go out and listen to this because this engagement spectrum was created prior to this legislation being implemented. So it's not true. We have to do this. We have to implement these numbers. And I couldn't agree more, Mayor Little, with your very well said comments. We have to go out and tell the community that we are being told to implement these numbers of housing for the next 20 years. And I also think it's really important to show where we are, as you've pointed out, but also to show us where our neighbors on First Nations land are, because there's a significant amount of housing that is coming out of neighboring First Nations lands. And that is going to impact how the transportation is going to work. It's going to impact all these things. So I think staff need to come back. I think we need to actually refer this back and ask them to amend what we're going to say to people, because I don't want to go out to the community and say, what do you think, when we have no ability to influence this legislation at all. We are just having to update the legislation that's already been passed and approved by the provincial government. So I don't even know actually why we're doing this. I think this is I think you're bringing forward, information to be able to do this, and I appreciate staff's work, but what are we going to be saying to people? Do you want to increase housing in this area? And what if they say no? Then are we going to tell them that, well, we can't actually say no. We've got to do this. And it's not affordable housing either, it's volume. That's the other problem with this whole scenario and this whole scheme, is that it's volume and it's market, and we need to focus on social housing and deep subsidy, not more volume of condos. So I don't think we're being very honest with the community, and it's not staff's fault. It's what we have to work with right now, but I don't think we're being honest with them, because as the mayor's pointed out, we're being forced to do this. This is not grassroots. Their input will not make a difference in regards to the requirements that we're being forced to implement under this legislation. So, can someone, can I make a motion that we refer this back for a revised document?
I would prefer to go through the speaking list first, but you have a right to refer this item to another forum, whether that's a workshop or whether that's some other matter. But I'd really love to be able to at least have everybody have an opportunity to speak to it first, and then I can come back to you for that motion if you so wish. Councillor Pope, your comments, please.
Thank you. Where to start after following you two? I completely disagree with this. I would like to remind this council that the reason that we had provincial housing laws put in place was because we were doing a very lousy job of sticking to the OCP, which clearly identifies the need for affordable housing and more housing for all different types of people on the North Shore. And we, after extensive engagement with the community over previous years that cost just a ton of money, came out with the previous OCP that said, this is a priority. And ever since then, the action plan, the this, the that, we say, oh yeah, this is a priority. And yet when push comes to shove and this council has an opportunity to vote for more buildings and more affordable housing and multi-unit family housing and coach houses that don't cost a fortune, what does this council do? The majority votes no. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in here. And that's why we need a public engagement process to get us through the next phase, which will reaffirm, I have no doubt in my mind, what all that previous engagement affirmed, that we need more housing and we need more affordable housing. And that is indeed what the people of North Vancouver want. It's valuable information to have. And I do not want to see any way, shape, or form of political posturing on documents that go out from the district talking about how this is being forced on us. It's completely inappropriate, especially during an election campaign. So having said all that, I would like to refer to slide 7, if you could call it up, with the, the types of engagement that are going to happen. And I was just wondering why it is that we didn't hear any suggestion in this of citizens assemblies, because we did have a group that came in from SFU for one of our, that gave a full presentation on how citizens assemblies have been working for other municipalities, including Gibson's and this and that. And they never came back to give us an update, which is unfortunate. But I wondered if that was on the list or if it could be included. That would
From
probably go to
staff about
communications.
citizen engagement.
Or can I suggest that it could be, that we follow up on that in the future when the communications plan is evolving? And those are my comments for now.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Back.
Can start this process in a better way than the comments that I heard from the mayor and others, Councillor Murray tonight. This isn't about telling our residents that, the province is forcing this upon us and we just have to do it and you don't really have a say. I don't think that's the intention. I think we have the opportunity to, I really think we have the opportunity to show the community that, we are prepared to grow and evolve, because I think most people recognize that, we have to, that they are going to have a say. They're going to be able to, provide their input in all different aspects of this update to the OCP. I was part of the council last term, going through the action plan and the review of the OCP, which reinforced that we have a very, strong official community plan. There was lots of, engagement, and throughout that process, people recognize that, the community is going to grow, and here's the types of things that we need to be doing. And I hope that we can have a similar kind of process as we look to update it this time. But starting it off in sort of manner that was suggested, I think is kind of divisive. I think it's political. I think we'd be much better off to, work with the province as a partner. And it's not even about working with the province. It's, it's just about, listening to the community and recognizing that, this is the growth that's happening and we have an opportunity to shape it. And they do have a say. On that, just in terms of some of the key interest holders that were listed, in addition to the list here, which I think is a good start, I would hope that we're listening to young people, and we can reach back to North Shore Community Resources. They've set up a framework for it through their Young Citizen Civic Forum, to provide input from youth, as well as new immigrants. And Impact North Shore, I think, should be on this list as well, and probably will be. I know they were engaged in the review last term in forming the action plan. But I see this as a really exciting opportunity, and just want to position it that way versus more of an adversarial one that I heard.
Thank you very much. Councillor Murray, your comments?
Mr. Milburn, on updated land use designations, and if we use the transit-oriented areas, that the circles of 8 stories and 12 stories identified at Cap U and around Phibbs Exchange. If the community was to come back and say en masse or through a survey that they were not in support of those densities in that area, what would be the recourse for us to implement in regards to this communications plan? What would we be able to do?
Worship, it would be dependent upon the nature of the concern. If the concern was purely height and density, the Act specifies that a zoning bylaw amendment couldn't be refused for those 2 reasons. However, there may be other reasons why the zoning may be inappropriate, such as hazardous conditions or other matters that have been discussed at this table previously. So depending upon the circumstance and the information provided by the public, we would provide advice to council about appropriate zoning for densities and heights and uses within the transit-oriented areas. And I'll remind council that we simply designated, that was council's the direction of the province, and the requirement was simply to designate the areas, but not to zone them ahead of time. So there is still the opportunity to look at case-by-case situations in those portions of the transit-oriented areas that might have limitations, such as hazardous areas and so on.
But those limitations have to be proven in order to reduce the density in these areas. We've already taken those issues to the province the first time we discussed this, did we not?
That's correct. You would have to look at evidence for why there is a limitation or concern within the transit-oriented area. I guess suffice to say, council has some choice about allocation. What is clear within the Act where council's choice seems to be diminished, and I'll try to use non-political language in this, but where council's choice is potentially diminished is in the determination of the housing needs of the community. So the total housing needs and housing types. That's going to be set through a calculus that is determined through a provincial regulation, and the staff will be reporting to council on that in November.
Right.
A key conversation that needs to occur, though, is how do you allocate that in the community? Where would you place that kind of density, those kinds of uses, in order to minimize impact to services, in order to avoid hazards, in order to avoid environmentally sensitive areas, for example. And all those conversations are very important ones in choosing how to allocate density in the community going forward.
So a simple way to present it would be, we have to we have to build 10,000 additional units. And if they can't go in certain areas because of geography or hazards or whatever, we have to find another place to make up that number, because we are given a number and an equation that the province is working out for us to absorb.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Milburn?
Yes, the current bylaw, OCP, is written as how to accommodate the estimated need of 10,000 units. It's more of a what I would call a normative conversation of future. So the province is defining the preferred future state through the housing needs report that will come to council for confirmation. And then that preferred future state will then council get to choose how to allocate that preferred future state.
Did we have a choice in regards to implementing this legislation? Did any municipality in the province of British Columbia have a choice in regards to the implementation of this legislation? Mr. Milburn?
Your worship, I believe it was a provincial legislation. The province made the determination. There was engagement that occurred in certain circumstances with certain provincial committees and through UBCM committees. And so feedback was provided, but the province's decision was their own in terms of the determination of the approval of the Act.
So this is an undemocratic process. This is not built on grassroots. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and years developing our official community plan, only for the provincial government to come in and blow it up They are not including in any of the counts of development or density property within First Nations land, which is a significant amount of density that is contributing to housing within our community. Certainly, it was some of the most affordable in the district, but like everything, it's even gone up. And so this is not a choice for anybody to think that this plan going out to the community is fair to say, what do you think? What do you think about this? And you're going to tell us what you think, and we're going to say, sorry, we understand what you think because we think the same thing, but we actually can't incorporate any of that into this document. It is, and this is not staff's fault. It's not your fault. You guys have just done what, you know, we've told you to do. This is the provincial government dictating democracy in the province of British Columbia and the district.
Thank you very much.
Give it a rest, Councillor Pope.
All right. No, I have a speaking
I
list.
listened quietly while you were talking, and I would appreciate the same respect. Thank you very much. I've earned it.
Councillor, your time has elapsed. The next speaker is Councillor Hanson. Councillor Hanson, your comments, please.
Thank you. I'm going to stay entirely away from the prevailing political debate. And I note in that context that we are in the very midst of a political election where some of this is the very subject matter of the decision that the voters have to face. My simple comment would be, thank you for the plan. Thank you for the hard work in assembling it. My preference would be for you to get started. You say you're going to get started in phase one, leading into the fall of 2024. And then my preference would be to report back. And we'll perhaps take another look at this. And the political climate in which we're looking at this will evolve a little bit, like the mayor says, all the other things that are going on. Whenever I look at these engagement plans, they always have the same challenge from my point of view, is that we talk to engaged people. We talk to people who want to come and talk to us in different ways. And in so doing, we fail to really gauge the will of the community, because the will of the community is contained in the minds of people who aren't that engaged, who aren't coming to talk to us, but who live here and whose priorities need to be our priorities. So I would say, get started. Thank you for your hard work, and think about ways that we can access and get the views of a broader cross-section, and specifically people who aren't as engaged. I mean, our goal, assuming that we're subject to these growth targets, our goal is to get the will of the community as to how to integrate this growth. And so we want to do that, not just by talking to the activists, not just by talking to the people who have various vested interests and engagement in the whole process going back for various reasons, but really gauge the most broad section will of the community, which I suppose is what local government elections are for. So that we'll have one of those in 2 years. But those are going to be my comments. And thank you very much for your work.
Thank you. Councillor Back, did you raise your hand? Nope. Okay. So I got accused of a whole lot of stuff there. The reality is our annual report is broken up in exactly the way I laid out. There's a statutory portion where we have to report things in a particular way because we're dictated to by the province to do that. There is another portion of the report that we get to craft, tell the story about what's going on in the community. So I don't know how I got accused of all kinds of things there, but that's what I'm seeking for the OCP, is that it's set out in that kind of fashion. This is our story, this is our narrative, and these are the statutory things that we have to report on. Let's make the distinction so that when we're communicating with the community, that they know what is statutory requirements and what are us sort of filling in the color commentary on what kind of community we want to be.
Can we amend this then?
I found it also a little bit humorous to be accused of politicizing the matter, It's entirely political. This policy was delivered in the 4th year of their mandate because of the BC housing crisis, where they had to fire the BC Housing Board. And so this is an entirely political policy. I'm not calling anyone out specifically for it, but I would argue to those present that your willingness to support provincial policy that trumps, manipulates, overrides municipal elections has more to do with whether you align with the provincial government or not. And if it was a conservative government in that place, I don't think as many people around this table would be saying, we need to support the province. We need to come out and they've said this and we need to implement what they've said. And so, I don't know, I've been around a long time on this, but I think that I'd much rather hear the benefit of people's comments rather than trying to ascribe all kinds of malevolent notions on our behalf to it. Because as far as I'm concerned, it should be presented like the annual plan. Statutory part, not statutory part. That's all.
So do you want a motion to ask that staff amend the process in order to include the statutory, or what we are required to
That is a very
do?
long time down the road in this process when we have to make those kinds of decisions. I'm happy to talk to staff along the way, but I'm going to support what's on the table here today. I see no further speakers on the matter. Prepared to call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. I would recommend that we have a leg stretch and use the facilities if you need to, and we'll resume in about 3 minutes time. All right, I'd like to resume. Unfortunately, my tablet has given up and decided to go home for the evening. It's been on updates underway for a very long period of time now, and it doesn't appear to be recovering. So I'll look to the clerk for some assistance if there's anything online we need to address. But we're moving on to item 8.5. This is the transitional housing solutions, and looking to Aileen from staff for comment.
Thank you. So good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the public. My name is Aileen Tavakoli, and I'm the housing planner within community planning in the district. I'm here this evening to provide a brief presentation to respond to Council's motion on May 27th in regards to transitional housing solutions for individuals experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness in the district. We recognize Council's concern for our North Shore residents who are living in precarious housing situations. And as per your direction, we conducted research and explored opportunities. Tonight, I will walk you through the key areas of the resolution. Some of that includes temporary housing forms, the partnerships, available funding and land, as well as vacant development sites and expediting permits. So as we all know, homelessness is an issue on the North Shore. The last point in time homeless count identified 168 unhoused individuals on the North Shore, and that is known to be an undercount. Over the years, Council have endorsed various initiatives aimed at addressing homelessness, as you can see on this slide here, namely the North Shore Homelessness Action Initiative that started in 2021 and was led by local government, First Nations, and our provincial and federal officials, and that put forward 12 action items to address this challenge. As part of our research, staff reviewed various examples of temporary transitional housing across BC. Highlighted here are the tiny homes in Kelowna, the modular housing in Vancouver. In the report, we spoke about the New West model. And at the bottom, you see the shipping container model in terms of a tiny home in Victoria, and the shipping home container in terms of modules stacked in Vancouver. Table 1 in the report provides a summary of these examples that we looked into. There are two primary costs associated with developing this type of housing: the one-time cost for the construction and the ongoing operating cost on an annual basis. The total cost varies significantly based on the type of construction and the services that are provided to the residents in these buildings. For instance, a smaller unit like a shipping container, tiny home can be built for under $20,000 with the help of some donations from our nonprofit partners or the community. While a larger unit, such as the multi-story modular that has its own bathroom and a kitchen, can exceed $200,000 per unit. Operational costs, as you might be familiar, are meals and employment counseling services and other support services that help the residents adjust to this housing and stay housed. And these costs are ongoing and can range between 20 or upwards of 50,000 per unit per year. So staff investigated several funding and land options as shown on this slide. The Heart and Heart program that we discussed in the report as well, and the Kelowna and the Campo River and some other projects took advantage of, was specifically for 7 communities with visible homeless encampments, and they had an MOU with BC Housing, and we don't have a renewal date for that fund. Staff from BC Housing has advised us that there's no separate funding for supporting temporary housing at this point. We looked at the CMHC program, the Rapid Housing Initiative that our neighbors, Squamish Nation, took advantage of for their supportive housing project, and that funding is committed for 2024, and the next round has not been announced yet. The Affordable Housing Fund, formerly known for Co-Investment Fund, is contingent on the BC Housing being a partner, and that's not been feasible at this point. In terms of land, we looked at the Federal Land Initiative and requested information through their online portal and learned that there are no current land available within the district, and no options were identified through the BC Housing assessment of provincially owned land and properties within the district. During the planning and approvals process, there may be instances where development sites become temporarily vacant. Following council's direction, staff have engaged with developers to assess any vacant with development sites or units. Additionally, we did our own review of district properties and homes, and neither approach identified any suitable site at this time. In regards to our 4 permanent social and supportive sites that are in various stages of development, we spoke with BC Housing and Metro Vancouver, and it was concluded that introducing temporary housing at this stage will delay the delivery of the permanent units that are underway. Expediting the approval process can significantly shorten the timeline of delivering housing units. In line with council's direction, staff are prioritizing and accelerating the approval of rental, social, and supportive housing projects, ensuring that this mandate is actively being fulfilled. In addition, staff have recently introduced an enhanced system of regular check-ins to track progress and mitigate any issues that might come up with these permanent social and housing projects underway. So this slide just summarizes some of the key factors that goes into building a temporary transitional housing within a short time frame. The attachment 2 in the report provides a detailed example of how these pieces will come together to ensure a project success, from securing municipal land to getting funding from different levels of government and partnership, and bringing together health organizations and nonprofits to ensure the success of a project. So staff recognize that addressing homelessness is a critical issue, not only for those that are impacted, but also for the success of our broader community. And this remains a priority for all levels of government. We are continuing to strengthen our partnership with BC Housing to deliver the permanent social and supportive housing units for our community. While we have not learned of any funding and partnership for transitional supportive housing that would be readily available at this time, further lobbying and engagement with senior levels of government may provide a pathway to secure funding for rapid transitional housing on the North Shore. This concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer questions from council. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Pope.
Just like to move to, thank you very much for this report. I think it's going to provide us with some excellent information that we can refer to in the future for housing options for the vulnerable. So I move to receive this motion.
Okay, there's a seconder for receipt. Thank you. Councillor Back, go ahead. Councillor Pope, your comments.
Thanks very much again. It was thorough, and I really appreciated the amount of work that's gone into it. Now, according to this report, the bottom line is that there is a lack of funding, especially from BC Housing. And without that funding, we can't build transitional housing. However, at UBCM last week, I had the opportunity to ask the minister, Ravi Kahlon, about this and whether his government wanted to fund housing for the unhoused and transitional housing. And he said yes. And he also confirmed that the province wants this type of housing to be built. So this is the will of the minister. And I'm not sure why BC Housing is not getting this message, but clearly there's a disconnect between the two. At any rate, as we've heard from Hollyburn Community Services tonight, and I have confirmed doing my own research, that we do not necessarily need BC Housing to fund projects. And I'll elaborate on that in a moment. But the first thing I want to do is just get to just reiterate again why this is so important and so necessary in case we lose sight of it in this discussion. If we agree that we need to provide homes for the unhoused and that need is urgent, and I believe every member of this council does agree with that, then we must explore other funding methods. The unhoused in this community cannot wait for permanent supportive housing to be built years from now. We are morally obligated not to let people die or suffer on the streets of this community. And here's the hard facts, as recently came out from Lookout's annual report. During the first 2 weeks of 2024, 36 British Columbians died outdoors. This included 9 individuals over the age of 60 and 2 over the age of 80. So to the funding problem, this report says without the necessary funding from senior levels of government, building transitional housing is not feasible. I strongly disagree with that statement. For example, the city of Victoria is now building transitional housing without BC Housing funds. And I talked to the mayor of Victoria about that, again at UBCM last week, and she says it's 100% doable. But you have to be exploring and be open to exploring all options. They are actually renovating a downtown, an old existing building, and making transitional homes on some floors when they're ready to transition out, and they move upstairs to permanent homes, all under one roof. And I've asked for more details on that so that we can learn from that and perhaps replicate it. There is also money in the Affordable Housing Fund. This council just approved a project in Lower Capilano that will provide $10 million to the Affordable Housing Fund. That money could go a long way to building homes for people in need. And thanks to the research here in this staff report, we could do it within months, not years, using modular type housing. So to next steps, the staff report has identified on page 12 that the next step that is critical to successfully developing transitional housing is to identify readily available vacant land with adequate servicing. So I move an addendum that adds, and that a closed meeting be held ASAP to identify and discuss readily available land in the District of North Van for transitional housing.
I'm going to check with the clerk on whether that's in order or not. Should we deal with the original motion first and then allow a follow-up motion from Councillor Pope?
Through your worship, it would be at the discretion of the seconder if they're open to it as a friendly amendment.
It's my amendment, so.
Oh, sorry,
Well-
to the seconder, to the motion. If they're agreeable, then it can be placed all together.
Okay, so it's amenable to the seconder, so it's that the report be received and
Yes.
that staff prepare a report for in-camera consideration of the council on specific properties that could be used.
Actually, we have that information already presented to us at previous in-camera meetings about the district lands. So I would suggest that we just move it to an in-camera discussion of the options that have been identified previously, unless there's something new on that front.
Okay, just looking for guidance, Mr. Stewart, on this. Disposition of land obviously has to take place in an in-camera session,
I think what, excuse me, what's being proposed here is that it's received and it's referred to an in-camera meeting.
Yeah.
For discussion on possible lands.
Yes, that's it.
straightforward. Yeah.
That's it, yes.
by the clerk. That's great. Okay, thank you. Carry on. Any other comments? Councillor Back, your comments?
Thank you. I just want to thank staff for the report. I thought the report was really well laid out and it really highlights some great examples that other municipalities have done to build this type of housing. I think we all recognize that there's a growing homeless issue on the North Shore. We're going to have to get creative with funding. It is going to take partners that may or may not be BC Housing, but I too heard the minister's comments. Councillor Pope and I were at the same session at UBCM, and sounds like if we've got something ready that we want to bring forward, they're open to it. They want to work with us. So I think the more work we can be doing now to, be prepared when those funding opportunities open up, the better. Yeah, I think there's some great examples of how this could be done. We have to think a little bit differently, be creative. I love some of the different building forms here, but at the end of the day, we want to lift people up, and we know that there's folks, in our community that are going to need housing. That issue is just growing. And as we look across the North Shore, it's a North Shore issue. It's in every community, but maybe this is an opportunity to work with the other municipalities, potentially with the First Nations. I mean, it's going to take a variety of different partners, and I think we should be open to anything. So thanks very much, Councillor Pope, for bringing this forward initially, and thank you, staff, for reporting back.
Thank you very much, Councillor Back. Councillor Hanson, your comments, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Pope, for bringing this forward. Thank you very much for staff. Absolutely support this immediately going to a closed meeting. This is a problem which we all know is getting worse and worse and worse. It's shocking to our conscience, I believe, to realize what is occurring, and the statistics you just read out shock us once again. But every day we're shocked by these facts. We can't wait. Clearly, we can't wait for others to solve this problem, and that's what Councillor Pope. Thank you very much for that initiative, because we need to take the initiative. So you have my support. Let's get a meeting and let's see what we can do. Let's get creative, and let's not take no for an answer. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Just my own comments on the matter. I don't disagree with anything that's been said about this. I think that if the district has land that is, as was described in the report, easily serviceable and available, then we should be finding a higher use for it to help address the issue. And I've recognized many years ago that if the municipality isn't clearing the way, then the province will just go to other communities, and we just won't get the support and the services available in our community. Even though I still hold fast that ultimately, it is the responsibility of the provincial government to be addressing homelessness issues, mental health issues, drug dependency issues. All of these things are the responsibility of the provincial government. But I recognize that if we don't have a role in it, then take a role in it, then they won't be addressed locally. What I will, I don't know, I hope it adds to the discussion and isn't a distraction, but I've been a part of these processes many times over the years. And I specifically remember a report that was produced about 3 years ago between District of West Van City and District of North Vancouver about the housing challenges that were being faced specifically on the North Shores. We're not looking at American statistics, Vancouver statistics, Canadian statistics. We're looking very, very closely the 168 people who are not properly housed in the report, which is an undercount. There's no question about it. It's an undercount in our system. And what kept coming up as a problem is almost all of the options that we were putting on the table required somebody to give up their RV and caravan, and that is the largest area of growth in homelessness and insecure housing in our community, and move into housing. The housing first model was what everybody was focused on. And you know, when you actually go and talk to people who are down on like Roosevelt, McKay Creek, down in Lloyd area, and a lot of the areas where there's encampments forming in our community, they'll be very open and upfront with you that they've been living on the streets for 14 years or 10 years, and they have no interest in the housing options that have been presented. They have no interest in the level 1 housing, the level 2 housing that's been presented, because they have to give up their RV and caravan. They have to give up the materials that they've been collecting. They have to also address the culture piece where, in a lot of cases, communities have formed in and around those encampments and places. And so what I'm looking for out of these recommendations is ways to address that specific issue, because that's where the growth is here. Single men who are over 40 years of age living in campers and RVs in our community is where the homelessness is growing dramatically. And so I'm looking for solutions that are specifically going to target that group. And I gotta say, it's not just going to be in modular housing. It's not going to be in other things. It's going to be in, secure place for an RV and a camper to maybe move into a space. It's going to be in agreements, maybe for, I know Councillor Ma, you've raised the issue of, coming up with partnership agreements so that there's maybe some work involved in it, and that they're compensated with the security of their space and others potentially. But I want to go a little further beyond the report to specifically say what's going on the ground in the District of North Vancouver, wherever we can, what we can identify about those 168 people, and what tools we would do differently than we've done in the past to actually address campers and RVs and single men over 40 in the areas where we're actually seeing the growth. Because we put the resources together when it's family housing. We put the resources together when it's single moms or women-led households. We put the resources together. But the area of growth that is occurring is older men, single, living in campers and RVs in an insecure fashion in our community. So I'm looking for a little bit more of that as we go along. It was identified by the Squamish Nation as their top priority when we had that housing discussion. Remember, with the last 3 mayors and representatives from the First Nations communities. Again, it seems like we're going down the housing first model when I think at least some of it has to be focused on people who are not going to support the housing models that were presented. But I want to support the motion. I think we should receive the report and also have an immediate discussion about appropriate lands within the District of North Vancouver. But I will say we have had this discussion many times before. Next speaker I have is Councillor Murray, followed by Councillor Ma. Councillor Murray.
Yeah, I concur with your comments, Mayor Little. And I think you said easily serviceable land. And I think that's going to be the challenge, because if you look at the modular housing that the City of Vancouver brought into parking lots, several years ago, many years ago, That's what they were putting them on, parking lots where there was already some level of infrastructure there to support them. And many of those temporary modular housing complexes are still there, even though they have a life to them. When I was driving down to the UBCM last week, I drive through Gastown, and I was parked outside. I was stopped at the light outside of the C-bus terminal, and I looked over, and there was a woman who had clearly slept in a box overnight on the street. But what struck me and what touched me and made this problem even worse than it is was she had a cell phone in her hand, and she was scrolling through her cell phone. And the contrast of somebody living in a box on a street with a cell phone is like that growing population of people sleeping in their cars. I had a friend who had some work done on their property a little while in the this summer. And one of the people that came to work on the property, they grew up in the North Shore, and they were living in their car. And, and I think we're trying to manage the system that we've got right now, where we do have areas of our community where there are campers and people sleeping in their cars. And a lot of those people are working. They work. I think we've lost opportunities over the years with, and I think most of these are all gone, sadly, but with affordable housing that we in our LCP said we should keep, but we raised our hands to tear it down. And I think there's some units over the years that were sat empty. I think we don't know the inventory of units that exist in older 1960, 1970 apartment buildings that are slated to redevelopment at some point. Sadly, if they're zoned, then the jury's out on whether or not they'll be demolished. But I think we should have worked better with the developers to say, while you're waiting, can we use some of these places for housing? And I've made some phone calls over the years to have that happen for some people that have reached out to me, but I don't think we did it enough. I tried to get modular housing down on Old Dollarton, and two developers agreed and then decided against it at the last minute. And it would have allowed actually transition from older affordable rental into modular housing and then back again. But ultimately, the housing that was then created was never going to be affordable for the people that had been displaced. So we also have to recognize we have contributed to this problem significantly by the redevelopment of our community and by, I thought, a very important part of our OCP, which was to accommodate the eclecticness of our community by protecting that older affordable housing. We still are contributing to homelessness by rezoning and having that older affordable housing at the threat of demolition. So I think there's only a couple of places that we could accommodate something like this that's serviced, that is not going to take, it's not going to have to deal with floodplain issues or green fields or anything like that. I think that's the challenge. And I think if we had more empty parking lots like the city of Vancouver, we'd probably be a little bit further ahead, but our geography just doesn't accommodate that. But we have some developed areas that we could consider, and I'm happy to have that conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Mah.
Thank you to staff for this report and to Councillor Pope for bringing this forward. I would say that we all know that housing takes time, money, land, and political will. I believe this council is trying to find solutions. I'm going to suggest when we meet, we look at how we can work and support nonprofits, as they tend to be more nimble and create community-based response. In addition to Hollyburn Community Services Society, I know that the YWCA is actively trying to find solutions on the North Shore. So, we should be engaging societies, nonprofit societies, and try to work with that group as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ma. I don't see any other speakers at this time. Prepared to call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Okay, on to item 8.6. This is the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General's Collaborative Public Safety Programs North Shore Situation Tables application.
It's so patient. Yeah, sitting there all night.
Staff comment, please.
As my team departs. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This report, originally scheduled for September the 9th, outlines a one-time grant opportunity from the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General's Collaborative Public Safety Programs. The grant will establish 2 situation tables for the North Shore, one that will be youth-focused, led by the North Vancouver School District, the other for adults, which will be led by the RCMP. Situation tables use a risk-based collaborative triage model to address significant risks faced by individuals and families, so including offending, victimization, treatment non-compliance, and severe mental health crisis. The goal is to quickly connect people to essential services across public safety, social services, and the health sector. This initiative builds on another previous federal grant for a public safety and youth crime prevention plan, now in its 3rd year. The Youth-Friendly North Shore Plan aims to create youth-friendly spaces and enhance care for at-risk youth and young adults. The province funding opportunity is for $100,000, and staff have submitted the application on the 10th of September and have since learned that the application was successful. So thank you, and staff are available for any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Murray.
I'll move this. Do we have to move it even though we've already got the grant and yes. You should have told us this whispered in the mayor's ear and told him that we would have you could have gone home.
Yes, if it is approved, we will submit the motion with the application to the province.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. This is the other thing that's growing in our community is
you have a motion.
Oh yeah.
And I need a seconder.
Councillor Forbes just seconded.
Councillor Forbes second.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Thank you, Mayor Little.
You're voluntold as long as you're okay with that.
I'm good.
Councillor Murray.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the issues of mental health are kind of out of control right now for young people, and I think sorry, I'm getting really upset about this all of a sudden. I think we've all had some experiences and I've certainly had some recent experiences where this is top of mind, and I feel like anything that we can do to support young people, but all people in regards to mental health and the crisis that they face and the lack of resources out there and a crumbling healthcare system and a crumbling mental health care system that can't support those that live here right now, but then are trying to address an increase in population. Last night on the news, there was a story about a family that came from overseas as refugees from the Middle East. And they're on their 4th displacement from housing. The parents can't work because they have mental health. They have PTSD from the country that they came from. It's a family of 8 living in a house, and they've been displaced 4 times. And they asked why they were brought here if we couldn't look after them. Why did they bring them to Vancouver if we couldn't look after them? And the federal government actually mandated them to come here, but we can't actually house them. And so now they have to go move again and uproot their families. And those are the stories that you feel like they're all alive and they're functioning sort of. Then it's the ones that are trying to access care and get turned away. And then they can't deal with it anymore. And that's growing. When the Carleton program at the Hope Center was cut by the ministry, a local teacher was working at part of that program, and an educator in psych, and just the loss of the ability to be able to help young people that were going into it. And, you know, those of us that have faced mental health and challenges within our own families, we know too well the challenges and the ability to be able to deal with mental health in a systematic approach. It just doesn't work. We're dealing with people. So absolutely supporting this. Thank you, Ms. Branson, for bringing this forward and for applying for this grant. But we have to do so much more, Mayor Little. And I think we actually in the future, you know, need to really bring this up and start making some noise in regards to this, because it's a desperation when you're trying to access help and you can't have it, you can't find it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Murray. Councillor Forbes, you're the seconder on the matter. Do you have additional comments?
I think Councillor Murray's coming from the heart response is the same as I feel, and then hopefully this kind of thing will put floorboards down where there's cracks, and the young people and the adults have fallen through the cracks. So I'm looking forward to that. But I do have a question. It was $100,000 application. 30% is going to go towards the setting up of it. Is it 30% for mobilizing, and the 70% is for the maintenance and identifying collaborative projects. Is that correct?
So the total grant is 100,000.
Yeah.
30,000 each would be provided for the training. So 30,000 for the youth
so that's
led,
a 60.
30,000 for the adult. And there's 3 modules that the community would go through in terms of preparing before launching the tables.
Okay.
And then 20,000 for each table would be provided, and that would be provided to you know, the discretion of the chair and the members of the table to determine what they needed the funds for.
So I guess my question is, how do we keep this, if we get this up and going with this first application, how do we keep this type of thing going? Like how, you know, you've just explained how far the 100,000 is going to go. I'd hate to start something that looks really good and then have it fall because we don't have money. Are you going to have to keep applying and applying, and will there be funding there? Have you been told anything?
I'm not aware of any additional funding sources for it, but I think the initial funding is meant to launch the tables, to establish the tables, to get the buy-in with the community and all the partners.
Okay.
Once the table is running, these are really intense. These are tables that are meeting almost on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. They're coming together quickly to discuss a case and then decide actions really quickly to say, you know, this is this individual, this is what they need. They're acting within 24 hours, 48 hours. So it's not necessarily a financial, you know, a huge financial commitment. It's really an in-kind commitment of all of those partners coming together to be working collaboratively together to support individuals.
Well, I did read that they were going to meet weekly or bi-weekly, and I thought that's amazing because people will get help just like that when they need it and not sort of fall through the cracks. So thank you.
And my sense is that as the province understands, there's also a data component. So we'll be submitting data, and the province provides information back to communities that we'll be able to use for planning purposes.
That's great.
And my sense is if there is an opportunity potentially in the future where they're noticing that tables have a need for something that costs money, maybe they do offer an additional
We'll have
grant,
something to back it
something
up.
else. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for bringing the report. I found the report really informative, and I think it's a really good idea. Thank you.
Councillor Ma.
Erica, thank you for this. A lot of good work here. I'm just wondering, so the table meets and decides a youth or an adult need additional services. What is downstream to make sure that those services are available? Like, for example, you know, here there's a long wait list for people getting into detox. If someone wants it now, it's going to be a couple months before they get it. What else do we need to do to make sure that downstream the supports and the services are in place?
Again, I think that's, you bring up a really great point. There probably will be a concern for what is available or if there is wait lists. But I think when partners are working collaboratively together, there are always opportunities. We have another program that we have been funding, the Solutions Navigator program, that's running out of the North Shore Neighborhood House. And every day they're making a difference in clients that are coming through the door, and they're all one-offs because partners are coming together to say, like, what are you able to do? What are you able to do? What are you able to do? Sometimes the housing solution isn't found on the North Shore and they're required to look for housing solutions off the North Shore. But for the most part, when those partners come together and they are given the flexibility to be creative, we're able to support a lot of clients on the North Shore.
Okay, I see no further speakers at this time. Prepared to call the question? All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Hopefully we have success in that retroactively. Well done. Okay, the next item up for discussion is item 8.7. We'll just note the time.
Yeah, we're going to be quick.
So we're going to need to probably extend beyond 10:30.
It'll be fine.
All right, we'll start it up and then I may have to interject if we get to that point. So the item is Councillor Murray's report. Councillor Murray, your motion, please.
So moved.
Okay, is there a seconder for motion? Seconded by Councillor Ma.
Thanks, Councillor Ma.
Councillor Murray.
So council, this is asking for a report back from council. We already do this, sort of. So we have a bylaw currently in place that was put in place several years ago, and it's asking for deposits by people that are redeveloping lots in the district, pre-1950 homes, where a contractor would lay down a deposit. And if that contractor salvages a certain amount, then he gets his deposit back or her deposit back. It's based on a sliding scale, so it depends on how much of the salvaged material is being salvaged, which will dictate how much of his deposit will be returned. So this is the same thing, except we're not deconstructing the house. We're actually moving the house. And this is why it was easy for staff to approve by a willing owner, property owner, moving the house in North Vancouver a couple of weeks ago by Renewal Development and down to the Squamish Nation. So what we're asking is for staff to return with the ability to look at possibly amending that 1950 bylaw. I'm just going to say that because it's something that I had a discussion with Carolyn Jackson about, because there are houses post 1950 that have a lot of really good materials in them. For instance, a house I lived in, it was built in 1967, had yellow cedar in the walls. So you want to salvage that kind of material. But this would allow us to consider this as a salvage, but as a whole, and moving it to another property to allow another family, or in the case of the house that was moved to the Squamish Nation, transition housing for people that maybe were displaced through a fire or waiting for housing to be built, et cetera. So I've talked to staff about this, our building department, Mr. Dwyer, Carolyn Jackson in our environment department, and they're very supportive of this. Obviously the house that was recently moved, again, a willing owner that wanted to see that house moved and used for another purpose and not deconstructed. And not demolished and sent to the landfill. You know, as you may know, I sit on zero waste for Metro Vancouver, and it's sobering when you go to the landfills. Sobering. We are some of the largest consumers in the world in Canada. You could furnish a whole house for $5,000 on Facebook right now with nice stuff. There is a pile, sadly, a pile of dining room tables and chairs and couches. Metro Vancouver is working hard at creating a system where they can possibly store some of this and allow a day for people to come in and just take it before it goes into the landfill. So, you know, there's, as Glenn pointed out at the beginning of the evening when he spoke so eloquently, you know, there are so many homes in this community. And I'll note that Mr. Machin, who spoke at the front of the evening in regards to the DCCs. They are actually looking at moving their family home, which is a lot that is being subdivided. It's a legal 3-lot subdivision. They're actually connecting with Glenn based on the news story that they saw, because it's their family home, and they want to try to save it and move it somewhere where somebody else can enjoy it. So it's a great program. It's a win-win-win. And again, we're already doing it. So this is just asking staff to come back with the logistics and the semantics of this for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mah, your comments?
Yeah, I'll be quick. Councillor Murray, thank you for doing this and inviting me to the ceremony, or I guess it was Glenn, but it was a house moving ceremony, and the house was being moved to the Squamish First Nation. I believe it was a perfectly fine home and a rancher, and it was going to be moved onto the Squamish lands and be put on a foundation and become, I think, a duplex. Like, yeah, it was great because you have occupancy in a relatively short time, and you know, I look forward to see more of this on the North Shore. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'll be supportive, but again, I don't know why I'm in this pattern tonight. Obviously, being a grump, I guess. Yeah. No, I was just going to say that. So from the 1920s through to, it wasn't fully outlawed in Canada until 2018. Asbestos was used, and so I do have a concern about us moving a house that has asbestos. I think you're better off to do hazmat removal instead of moving it to somewhere else. And so from the 1920s forward till just last decade, asbestos was used either in the creation of the house or often in renovations that were done to the house in the 1950s through 70s kind of thing. And so I don't know that I want to punish a developer with a bond they have to pay that won't be returned to them when they have contaminated material. And so trying to figure out what the best way to address that question is.
I have the answer.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you that answer. Renewal Development does all the asbestos abatement. It's part of the process. So we're not moving a house filled with asbestos. They're doing the abatement and then they're moving the house. And then they're adding on a basement. In the case of the one that was moved to the Squamish Nation, they're putting another suite in. So it is like they're using the shell and all the good materials. They're looking after all of those costs, and then they're transferring it to their new location. So that will come back in the report from staff. But that is something that is dealt with by this particular company, one of the only ones that does this work in the region. So you don't have to worry about that at all.
Thank you very much for the additional information.
Yeah, and that house, it was all abated before it was moved. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I see no further speakers on the matter. Prepared to call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. That completes the business of this evening's meeting. Once again, I will say that we had originally, when we posted the agenda, that there was going to be an item 8.8, public inquiry for North Shore wastewater treatment plant. That has been rescheduled to the November 4th meeting of the council. So if you were looking through the package and wondering why we weren't addressing it, that has been moved to November 4th. I don't know that we have time for reports. You got 8 minutes? Any additional reports, Mr. Stewart? All right. I'm going to say we completed the business of this evening's meeting. I'll accept adjournment. I'm going to take adjournment from Councillor Forbes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the staff for preparing the reports for our consideration today. Thank you to the members of the public who stayed with us through the discussion, and wish everybody a fantastic week. Have a great night.